Okay, so we're going to begin right now. We'll let the last couple of members into the room, the virtual room, that is. And I think we're ready to go. Well, can I say how great it is to be back in this room chairing a meeting? This, in truth, is 2.5 years into my term, and this is only the third time I've chaired a board meeting from this room. So it's really a delight, even in this crazy hybrid setting, to welcome you all. And for all of you on Zoom, I'm happy to see you. I have your pictures right up on my screen, so it's like I have you right next to me. It's great to have you here. And so we told you when we started this is that the need to be flexible. Certainly, this world has thrown a few curveballs at us in the last couple of years. And I just am so pleased that we're able to convene many of us in person, but all of us in the combinations hybrid setting. And we have a lot of important work to do this week, whether it's 600, the fraud, project proposal, or the work plan. Those are all key topics to achieving our board's goals and objectives. So all participants have received the agenda papers for this meeting. Notice the meeting has been provided to the public, and the agenda papers, as always, are provided on our website. We are at full capacity this week, but we know because of changes in schedules, time zones, that from time to time, we may not have the full capacity, the full complement of board members, but in general, and particularly for decision-making meetings, we will be at a full complement. I want to welcome our observers. Two are joining us by Zoom, Janine for the PIOB, and Yosh, one of our official observers, and Jim Dowkin next to me. It's great to see Jim in person. We may live less than 15 miles apart, but I don't think we've seen each other since that last CAG meeting before the pandemic hit us in full force. The other two people I want to welcome, they may join us at different parts of the meeting, are our incoming board members, Bill Edge and Warren Maroon. For those who don't know Bill, he's chair of the Australian Audit and Assurance Standards Board, and Warren is a professor at the School of Accountancy at the University of, Billy, I need your help on this.
University of Witwatersrand.
Yeah, it's pronounced exactly how it's spelled. In South Africa. We welcome them both to the board. The other thing I would like to say is, you know, I've talked about how rare it's been my chair in a board meeting in this room, but I believe this is Sue, Josephine, Wendy, and Diane's first meeting in person with this board. And Edo too, sorry, since they've been appointed. So it's great to see you in person. There's no hazing ritual associated with in-person board meetings, so you're lucky for that. We have one new TA joining us today for the first time, Brian Wilson, who will be supporting Wendy. And I also want to welcome Diane Hardesty, who's observant and will be taking over for Denise Weber in 2022. We're also very excited to welcome two new staff members to the IAASB team. Sally Ann Bailey, many of you know, joined the team as a director in November 1st. So Sally Ann, she raised her hand over there. Great to see you. And we welcome a new staff fellow, Danielle Davies, who's helping to propel us on our technology front. Danielle is based in London and will be, as I said, working on some of our disruptive technology initiatives. And obviously it will be our, sadly, opportunity to bid farewell to two of our important board members, Imran Vankar and Roger Simnet. And we'll be having an official farewell later this week. So, as I said, a lot to do this week. On 600, that's what we'll kick today off with. And following through on the walkthrough on Monday, the task force plans to bring back revised drafted for some sections on Thursday to address targeted issues. Hopefully they're targeted and based upon what I've seen, it probably will be that. And the updated drafting on the discussion on Thursday will then be distributed to you by 5 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. After the Thursday session, ISA 600 task force will process any changes to standards and distribute another revised version by Friday afternoon. The task force will be available for consultations over the weekend on Sunday, and details on how to sign up for those sessions will be communicated with members in due course. Any changes arising from the consultation sessions on Sunday will be processed by the task force, and a final version of the standard will be sent to everyone by 3 p.m. Eastern time on Monday, December 13th. That's the version we hope to approve on Tuesday. Our second topic of the week is fraud. On Tuesday, we will be discussing the proposed project proposal presented by the Fraud Working Group, which sets out the approach to enhance and clarify aspects of ISA 240. In terms of timing, the Fraud Working Group will process your feedback and revise the project proposal. They plan then to approve, we plan to, as a board, to approve the proposal next Monday. So again, the hope is that any revision to the project proposal will be sent to you by Friday noon. And finally, we'll be talking about the revised work, the proposed work plan for 2022-2023. A new draft will be circulated to you tomorrow morning. The reason why you don't have it yet is that the planning committee spent some additional time looking over the comments we received. We wanted to get it right because there is no turnaround draft, but we will send it to you shortly. And then we hope to get this approved on Wednesday. So that's where we are on those three topics. Just a reminder, after we're done with our open plenary session, we'll have an executive session on Thursday. A couple of things about conduct of the meeting. These are approval sessions. And while we don't anticipate re-deliberated long closed discussions at the board that have been vetted by the board many times, and many of you have provided offline comments, it is essential that significant comments and matters are raised to the plenary, if you have them, to allow others to have an opportunity to provide input on those views. So we talk about it, we have talked about it in the past. So if you're sure if it's a borderline call between an editorial and something you think of a matter of substance, I'd err on raising it just to make sure that we get everything on the record. Editorial comments, of course, should be sent to task force or working group chairs or staff offline. So I'll conclude this portion of my introduction just by thanking everyone who's been involved in the preparation of the papers for this meeting. That goes for the task forces, working groups, and staff. The papers are in excellent shape, and I think they will permit a really good conversation in all sessions this week. This is the opportunity, I've always reminded this because we haven't met as a plenary for a couple months, to highlight some of the activities that we've had for the public record since then. And the first is the publication of our new digital handbook, which went live on November 8th. This is a multi-year project, intense involvement of our staff. So thank you to the staff team. This is what I think is a real step forward in the access to our standards. And I think we could do a lot in terms of improving accessibility going forward because we have such a solid foundation now. So secondly, since our last board meeting, we also held a live LinkedIn session to discuss the LCE standard. And we recently launched the LCE Consultation Survey in collaboration with IFAC. So now that, please point people in that direction if they want to input on our LCE work. We've been very busy with outreach. I made my first international outreach trip since March of 2020. In November, Bev and I visited the UK. We were helped by a number of our board members on that trip. That trip included meetings with the IAASB, the IVSC, Accounting for Sustainability, the Basel Committee, the FRC, UK ICAW, ACCA, and ICAS, among others. We had some press opportunities while we were there, and we had an outreach event with the ICAW on the LCE standard. So a lot happening there. We are continue to do a lot of outreach. This will come back in our work plan about the topic of sustainability and climate change. Lynn participated in a panel presentation hosted by the ICAW. We met informally with a number of different groups, including folks from Climate Accounting Project, the DPPC, ECG Assurance Task Force. This builds on other work we've done with IOSCO and IFIA on the topic. I think we're going to be in a really good position to act on sustainability assurance. LCE, again, going back to a previous theme, active part of our outreach this last quarter. LinkedIn live events take place all the time. We've held a series of roundtables with board members in a number of parts of the world, leveraging video platforms. We've reached a diverse range of stakeholders through these events, including regions we don't normally hear from on our consultations, including the French-speaking African countries. Kai and Bev also attended a live roundtable in Dublin when they were visiting the UK. So they stepped out of the UK for a moment, came back in. They wanted to see what more testing requirements were about in the process. They made it back. And we have been held meetings on the draft standard target stakeholders with the CEAOB and the Argentinian Audit Standards Board. So really a lot happening right now. Other highlights of our outreach this quarter have included lots of outreach of group audits with IFIAR, Basel Committee, IAIS, INTERSCI, and the CAOB. This was all very helpful and included the standard. I spoke to the ICGN. Our goal is to continue to increase our outreach to the investor community as well. And next week, we will have our quarterly meeting with the PIOB, where the PIOB is expected to discuss and approve the conforming amendments on the IAASB's other standards arising from QM standards being approved. So that's a lot. You can see we're busy. There's no rest for the weary when it comes to the IAASB. And we're keeping busy in our mostly virtual world. Speaking of virtual, I encourage you and any of our public observers to be interacted with our Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube channels. The amount of subscribers are going up on all of them. We have 8,361 followers on Twitter, 7,500 plus on LinkedIn, and almost 1,500 subscribers on YouTube. So that's another reason you have to press your microphone in a timely manner so all your YouTube followers could hear your remarks. Okay, I've talked a little bit about the way to use your microphone. I don't think I need to raise that again. Please, again, press the mics to speak. Press them when you're done speaking. I'm going to have to manage the Zoom raised hand functions and the room raised hand functions. So please bear with me, a little patience. And so I think that's all I want to say about the logistics. Anything else, Billy, you want to say on the logistical front before I remind people about minutes?
No, nothing at this stage, Tom.
Okay. I'm conscious of time, and 600 really is our main event for today. But I do want to say the draft minutes for the September 2021 meeting, as well as the October 2021 video conference, have been posted for board approval. The minutes, based upon your feedback, should be approved during our Thursday session. Okay, let me pause here if anyone has any other issues to raise. Don't see any hands up. That must be we're ready for 600. Are we ready? Look at that excitement on the board. Okay, so Len will walk the board through the draft of ISA 3600 revised. The task force is seeking the board's view on the proposed conforming and consequential amendments as well. we want you, again, remind you to raise all the key issues that you see to allow the task force time to consider and address any concerns in turn of the drafts. Also, if you have it, and I think most people have, if you have draft or editorial set suggestions, please send them to Len, Dan, or Jasper as soon as possible. I think we've had a lot of consultation on this draft. We've had a lot of board discussion on 600 for over a series of a couple of years now. I think we could see how it is bearing fruit because when I speak to people publicly, and particularly the regulatory communities, there seems to be growing support for what we've accomplished. So that's thanks to the excellent efforts of Len and the task force. So Len, over to you. And we'll talk 600.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the statements on 600. I really appreciate all the support so far. I'm just reflecting that, to many of you, I think Tom mentioned the last 2 years has been very, very helpful in terms of getting input, exposure draft comments, and helping us to get to this point in time. But just reflecting, I would say exchanging communication with Josephine a few weeks ago. For some of us, like Dora, Josephine, and Wolf, this is our 6 years on this project. And we really like to end in a 6-year cycle. We won't go into a 7th year. So we're excited about this moment in time, and then hopefully we'll take the board into a place next week that you can support us and getting the standards out. I know this is a first physical meeting. Next slide, please. I thought I'd show you a picture. This picture was taken about 24 hours ago when I was landing to LaGuardia Airport, and just happened that yesterday was a sunny day, and I look out the window, I saw this picture of Manhattan. And I used to live 2 blocks away from here, and also because IAASB, I've been to New York many times, and over the years you don't appreciate the sunset on in New York. It's like, oh my God, it's too busy, traffic is horrible, I have to go to New York for a meeting. But after 2 years of COVID, you actually have more appreciations, being able to and come back to New York. But when I was looking at a photo after the plane landed, I was just thinking about, oh my God, that city is so complex. With all the roads, you have the avenues, north and south, you have all the streets, east and west. It's almost like a maze, much like ISA 600. Our goal is to provide a roadmap. If you know New York, the numbering systems are perfect, right? Once you see the numbers, you know exactly where people are. And hopefully that's the objective or goal of our standard is that linkage to other foundational standards. Even though it looks intimidating, looks like there's a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, hopefully that roadmap is there. Next slide, please. So in the last a few months since September meeting, I don't think my task force and staff have stopped. I think we had meetings and calls almost every week between September and this week. We had a number of sessions with IAASB. There's a project they're looking to approve on group audit independence. I just want to share on the public record is the amount of effort and coordination and support from IAASB staff and also their task force in helping us to get to where we are today. I know they are so accommodating. Some of the definitions in the standards is going to be carried forward to the IAASB exposure draft. But more importantly, we had a tour de table of all the monitoring group members in the last month or last 6 weeks. We started with IOSCO, IFIA, Basel Banking Group. We had IAIS last week. We had in between Intelsci, was called to share our updated draft, and also, of course, IFAC, SMPC committee was also involved, and also the staff has been communicating with the PILB staff. So I thought I share probably very similar to what Tom sent out a couple of weeks ago in his email. In our outreach, largely very, very supportive in terms of where we are. There, in our interaction with all the monitoring group members, they do raise questions, but the questions are more focused on clarifying some of the changes we made or understanding the reasons for the changes. But there were no technical questions or requests in terms of asking us to change the requirements or application materials. That has been very consistent through our engagement with the monitoring group members. But they do have one request, is do not tinkering too much. They feel that tinkering at this stage may have unintended consequences, as they would like the task force board to be disciplined. It's important to focus on the principle of the standards. Some of the practical situation may be better addressed in implementation guidance and supporting materials. So I thought those were very helpful, at least consistent message. My task force member and staff, including Willie, they also participate in some of the discussions. So I was just wondering whether, for example, Josephine and Dan or Willie, are there anything you like to share in terms of our outreach in the last a few weeks in terms of monitoring group input, regulatory input?
No, thank you, Len. I think, you know, what I've experienced, I've not been with at all of these sessions, but I've attended many of them with you and the task force is, like you said, more about questions around clarity rather than raising any significant issues. Thank you.
So with that, next slide, please. So for the goal today, today we have 5 hours roughly to go through the standards, and very much like to hear what you have to say. But one of the things I thought at least want to express our appreciation is all the written comments received from the board members and TAs based on the reading of the draft. A few hundred comments we received, but I think it's manageable. But it's also demonstrate the passion about the topic. But because the number of comments and suggestions we raised, it's important. I think Tom explained it in his opening remark. It's important we specifically focus on the area which you believe are significant and fatal flaw in nature. Raise them at the plenary meeting so we can have a full discussion. Even if the changes you are supportive, we'd like to hear from you that we're on the right track. It's important that we hear, because the task force can focus on providing documents for the turnaround on Thursday for your further considerations for vote next week. But it's also important that we respect due process. We are not going to reopen issues that board has previously reached conclusions, because those conclusions were the basis that task force has faithfully followed those decisions to reach to what we have read last week in the agenda paper. We also received quite a number of nice to have comments and editorial suggestions. I can assure you that the task force will consider them as part of our process this week. We already met yesterday. I also met with the staff this morning. Some of them are very, very helpful, but because we only have 4 or 5 hours today, it's important that you let the task force further digest those comments, the nice to have comments and editorial suggestions. there are also several one-off comments. What I mean one-off comment is only one board member raised it, or maybe maximum no more than 2 or 3. I think the task force will faithfully go through all of them, and we will consider based on the merit of the comments you raised, the suggestions we raised. But I'd like you to trust the task force, the discretion to process all these one-off comments. Of course, we'll have a Zoom consultation session set up for Sunday if you want further clarification if we didn't take them in the next draft you see. So with that, I want to pause here to see if Dan or Jasper or any of my task force member have anything to add. No, great. It's good to have all my task force members here, including I don't see Eric there, but Eric has been very helpful participating yesterday on a Zoom call with us. So with that, we'll go and start our walkthrough of the standards. Next slide, please. So for this section, we're going to cover everything from paragraph 1 to paragraph 15. So anything from introduction, objective, effective date, and all the front end of the standards before the requirement sections. So I just want to highlight one major change was based on our meeting in September. We made changes to the paragraph 14b, the definition of the component auditor. The task force deleted the reference to at the request of the group auditor to acknowledge that there may be circumstances in which the group auditor may be able to use the audit work performed by a component auditor, but may not have to specifically request the component auditor to perform the audit work. So those audits was performed for statutory or other regulatory purposes. We explain that in paragraph 810, which will go through that later in today's presentation. So the task noted, however, that the interaction with the component auditor is needed in these circumstances to comply with the requirement of the ISAs. So that's the one major changes we would like to highlight to the board for your comments. So with that, Tom, maybe I'll turn back to you to seek comments from the board from paragraph 1 to paragraph 15.
I'll see comments in a second. It's just clarify. It was paragraph 14C, right? Not B. Okay. So I'll take comments either in the Zoom room or by your name tags. Wendy?
I just have a question for clarity. Usually we do the application paragraphs at the same time as the primary paragraphs. So we're doing the application paragraphs later. Thank you.
Yes. So?
Thanks. So a couple of comments. Firstly, thanks to Len and the task force for all the work you've done on addressing the concerns we've raised previously. The change in 14C for me helped address an awful lot of the concerns we raised about the use of statutory audits and equity methods. So very supportive of that. I had a small comment on 5. I'm not quite sure where to draw the line on this one, Tom, but I preferred the text that was there previously that was talking about the common information systems and controls across the group. That to me allowed a bit more flexibility, that you might have common controls or what have you in a subgroup. So it's not kind of all or nothing. So my preference would be to either go back to what we had before or look at things like the phrasing we have in A48, which talks about the extent of commonality. Thanks.
Okay. Coyote?
Thanks, Tom, and good evening from Europe. Len, thanks very much for the work you have done and the task force and the staff working 6 years on ISO 600. Congratulations. I have one comment to paragraph 14 C in relation to the deletion of the words at the request of the group auditor in this paragraph. My stakeholders have indicated to me when we have discussed it that this deletion makes it less clear when an auditor at component level becomes a component auditor, particularly when an audit of financial statements is completed at an entity or business unit prior to the group auditor deciding to use that work. A solution might be to add additional application material to the definition, clarifying that an auditor of the financial information of an entity or business unit does not become a component auditor until the component auditor has confirmed that the component auditor will cooperate with the group auditor in accordance with paragraph 24. That's my comment. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kai. Any other comments? Imran, let's note for the record, I like your animation. You're showing a lot of empathy for us mask wearing. Okay, Len, a couple of comments back to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for those comments. And Sue will go back and see the linkage between paragraph 5 and A48 you have suggested, and see whether that fits. Kai Wu, thank you for the comments, and appreciate the concern raised by the German stakeholders. We actually have seen the comments, had this meeting, and the task force spent some time in terms of looking at application material, in terms of how to work with that definition. But it's important to emphasize that if you look at paragraph 23 and 24 in the standards, when you are involving the use the work of a component auditor, the first determination, group auditor need to make sure that they will be sufficiently involved in the work of the component. Then paragraph 24, you are requiring the component auditor to confirm they all cooperate. So that principle, that requirement is currently sitting in the standards, and we'll look at also the application material to support us to paragraph, and see how that work with a definition. But just want to assure you that the task force and the staff actually have started working on that to make sure that it is clear. But let me just pause here to see if Dan and Jasper and anything to add based on our discussion yesterday. No, so we'll probably come back depending on what issues we'll discuss the rest of the day. But we are really working on providing some application material to the definition. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands. Anyone else want to comment on paragraphs 1 through 15? No tense. Okay, Len, proceed, please.
Okay, thank you. So next slide, please. So the next section is on the requirement, paragraph 16 to 29. So just go over some of the changes we made in the sections. So paragraph 22, the task force changed the introduction to the bullets, as the task force was of the view that the matters in paragraph 22A and 22B are special consideration for group audit. So ISO 300 planning and audit of financial statements in that ISO 300 paragraph AE. So the phrase before, it wasn't really fully aligned with ISO 300 based on, we went back and looked at 300. So the changes to make sure that we're consistent with 300 language. Next change we made was paragraph 27. The task force aligned the wording more closely to ISO 220 revised. Paragraph 20 and 21 in paragraph 220, the paragraph relate to the ethical requirements, independence. Then in paragraph 29, in the draft presented to the board in September, the task force added a separate requirement in paragraph 23B for communications between the group auditor and the component auditor to take place at the appropriate points in time throughout the group audit. So this umbrella requirement was intended to apply all communication between group auditor and component auditors. But in that September meeting, as you can recall, that the board found the umbrella requirement to be confusing. So the task force combined the paragraph 23A and 23B as we presented back in September draft. The task force is of the view that the paragraph A83, A104, and A142 provide the guidance on the timing of the communication through the course of the group audits. So changes made in 22, 27, and 29, as I explained. With that, Tom, I'll turn back to you for board's comments.
Thank you, Len. Okay, any comments on paragraphs 16 to 29 in the requirements, either by flipping your name 10 over or by show of digital hand? Julie.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you, Len, for all of your hard work in the task force and getting us here. We provided some comments to you offline, so I'm only going to raise the significant ones here. And my comment is with respect to 19B, little b. And I think maybe I'm struggling with that one for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that, and this is linking back to applying ISO 210. So when you're setting out the engagement between group management and the group auditor, it says, that group management might be able to help you get access to different information. And I think in little b, we have to put in the concept of access to additional information, because right now it's written that they might be able to provide you additional information, which may or may not be the case. So the construct, I think, for the little b needs to follow the same as little a. So it's access as opposed to providing information. And then the other part about little b is because component management can be determined and is determined by the auditor as opposed to how the management might look as, because it's determined by the auditor. I think setting out in the engagement letter process who component management is would be tricky, and it could change over time as the group audit goes along. So I think we need to probably strike out and component management there, because I don't know if you're going to be able to do that effectively in the engagement letter process.
Okay, Diane.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Len, to your team. I did send along some comments, and I just want to raise one point, and this might just be a request. Maybe my interpretation is not correct, but it's paragraph 26B, and we struck the word firm. The sentence now reads process or external inspections related to the component auditor, and we struck the word firm. And I wasn't sure if I'm reading that too literally to mean you want to bring that back to the actual individual partner, or still retaining the concept of the audit firm, because I think when you think about monitoring or remediation, that is very much a firm level process. So again, I might be reading it too literally, but curious about why we struck the word firm. Thank you.
Okay, Wendy.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Len, and your team, your 6-year team. I do think this roadmap is less complex than the picture of Manhattan. And happy for the activities of this week. My comments are also on 19B, have similar concerns as Julie expressed, practical concerns about how the requirement in 19B could be applied when drafting or signing the engagement letter. The components might not be determined and the client is not part of that determination. We did send in some suggested revisions to B, which would slightly change B, take out component management and add in something about including information in relation to the entities or business units that comprise the group. And we made a suggestion perhaps for D, for consent to communicate with and get additional information from the entities that are ultimately identified. And then we also send in maybe a proposed application paragraph. And that is all I have in 16 to 29.
So,
And same point as Julie and Wendy on 19B. We've also sent in some suggestions, and I think they probably sound kind of similar to what you've had elsewhere, Len.
thank you, Sue. Okay, I don't see any hands on the Zoom. So Len, back to you. Some suggestion 19B and others.
Okay, thank you for the comments on 19B. So I just want to highlight that 19B was is what's in ISA 210, the standard itself. Also, it has the expression may. So it's a may requirement, but we do take the comments that we heard from Julie and from Sue and Wendy and Wendy and Sue. You do have those suggestions that the task force will take a look to see if how to clarify or how to make your operational task force or to consider that. But we're not able to override the requirement to 10, so we just had to figure out a way out to deal with that. Diane, your comments on the change from component auditors, delete the word firm. I'm striking a blank. Dan, Jasper, which Russia, anything in terms of why we delete the wording firm?
I'm not sure, Len. I have to go back to the notes from it. I'm not sure if any of the other task force members have an idea.
Okay, so you'll go back and consider that point. Okay, any other comments on this session? Helen, I think we could move ahead.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Again, just want to welcome my task force members also coming as well, because there have been a lot of changes, and some of them might be able to provide more colorful comments than me. So next section deal with the requirements in paragraph 30 to 44. Sorry, next slides. And just to highlight a couple of changes here. Paragraph 31 and paragraph 32. So given a deletion of paragraph 23B, we just talked about, the task force added back the reference on a tiny basis in paragraph 31 and 32. Also in paragraph 31, the board noted in September meeting that paragraph 31A casts a very wide net of what might be relevant to the component auditor. So in response, task force spent a lot of time discussing it and decided to change the paragraph to limit the matters to be communicated to matters that group auditor determined to be relevant to the components design or performance of risk assessment procedures for the purpose of the group audit. We also made changes to paragraph 39 to align with this wording. Next change I want to highlight in this section is paragraph 38. The task force revised the wording in paragraph 38b in response to board's comment that fraud exists at the assertion level and therefore do not technically exist in a consolidation process. And the last last change I want to highlight is paragraph 43. Task force moved the condition to the beginning of the requirement based on our CUSP principles. In addition, the reference to paragraph 23 of the September draft was deleted. It was deemed unnecessary. So those are the ones I like to highlight. And Tom, I'm happy to take comments for paragraph 30 through 44.
Okay, 30 to 44. So,
Thanks. So I've referenced 35A before about component performance materiality, particularly in the context of an equity method investment. And that continues to be a concern because I think we are potentially setting people up for failure here in that there may be situations where if you have a large equity method investment where you're only accounting for the appropriate percentage, the performance materiality within that component audit could be more than group performance materiality. And I've referenced before the AICPA guidance. There's similar guidance by other national standard setters, and the wording of those guidance is slightly different. And I think if we're in a position where there are different wordings being introduced in different places and sometimes not being introduced, I would ask the task force to look again about whether we can at least recognise, it doesn't have to be a lot, but a sentence that recognises that there may be situations where that needs to be looked at. So that's the main point. I also had a comment on 32A, which is, I think 31 and 32 are kind of two sides of the two-way communication piece, but 32A is much wider in that it looks at all component auditors, whereas 31A is talking about the component auditors that are involved in performing risk assessment procedures. And so we've sent in a couple of suggestions. There are questions around whose judgment it is around the matters that need to be communicated from the component to the group auditor. So if you could have a look at that, please, that would be helpful. Thank you. But the main comment is on 35A, 35B. Sorry.
thank you. Thank you, Sue. Chun-Wei?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Lan, and task force and staff for all the great work on 600, bring it to where we are today. I think it's in a really good place, so congratulations for that. I had a few comments throughout the document which I've sent through, so I take comfort and Lan, your assurance that the task force will be going through them, including those I think good to have, to slightly more than good to have in that editorial. So I look forward to your looking through those comments and addressing them. For this part, I would like to maybe raise two comments, if I may. The first one is on 31, paragraph 31A. And first of all, let me just say that we are very much supportive of a lot of the amendments that have been made since the last draft. So we took the opportunity to sort of go through the standard again with a fine-tooth comb. So we are bringing up some of the points that in relation to drafting that were there before, but hopefully these are valid points. So 31, my point is relating to paragraph B. And this is in applying 550, and we're talking about group auditor communicating to component auditors on a timely basis, related party transaction, relationship transaction, identified by group management and any other related parties of which the group auditor is aware. And by the construct, I think the interpretation is that the any other related parties are those that the group management actually did not identify. So I guess the question is, should there be some reference in the application material, maybe about how the group auditor may consider the implication of this part, including whether more work needs to be done to establish that, maybe there are more related party relationship that the group management has not identified. Is the omission indicative of control failure or even potential fraud? So I thought maybe a reference to that in the application material will be helpful in relation to this part. My second comment I would like to raise here is on paragraph 32A. So it's the same paragraph that Sue mentioned, but maybe slightly different point. Here we're talking about what the group auditor shall request the component auditor to communicate. And we're talking about methods that are relevant to the identification and assessment of ROM at the group financial statements level due to fraud or error. But I felt that maybe the scope, we are unnecessarily restricting it to methods relating to financial information of the component, because during the course of their work, the component auditor may come across matters that are relevant to the identification and assessment of ROM at the group financial statements, but may not be pertaining to the component that they're auditing. So I was just wondering whether we should just remove related to financial information of the component, because it looks to me an unnecessary restriction in the scope. So those are the two comments I'll raise at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Chong-Wei. Isabel.
Hello, good evening, everybody from Paris. Very sad not to be physically with you in New York tonight. And really, I want to thank the task force for the impressive work that has been done. We have sent some comments, and I will only raise the main one. The comments I will make are the comments that were made discussing with practitioners in France about the matters that appeared as being unclear, or the parts of the standard that where they anticipate to have implementation issues. And the first point we did not understand was in paragraph 38, little b. So we read agenda item 2B in conjunction with agenda item 2A. I listened to the explanation from Len on the fact that a risk of fraud only exists at the assertion level, but looking at the modifications that have been performed in 38B, we still have the risk of material misstatement due to fraud in the consolidation process. So I don't understand if we have made the changes we intended to make initially. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Imran?
Good evening, everybody, and good evening, Chairman. I raised my hand to make exactly the same point Isabel has just made, but since it's my first time speaking and it's my last meeting, I'm going to make a few more points. But in doing so, let me remove my virtual mask because, like Susan, it's hard to speak with your mask on. So now that my mask is off, I want to start by saying, like you, Tom, I really agree that the papers for this meeting are truly outstanding. There's really been a fantastic amount of effort that has gone into it, and really appreciate the work of the task force, particularly on ISO 600, to Len, to Dan, and Jasper, and the whole task force. And I thought that the explanatory document that Isabel just referred to in 2A was really, really helpful. And so the point that Isabel makes to paragraph 38 in 2A suggests that a fix is to be made, but it looks as if the fix was not made in 38B, or at least that's the way I understand it. However, but having said that, Tom, I also want to say that there's a lot of work that this task force has done, but I also appreciate there's an immense amount of work that has gone into the planning of this meeting. And really, this has been harder than any other meeting for our team to plan with all of the hybrid elements to it. So the entire leadership team there, Tom, led by you and Willie and everyone else, really appreciate your efforts to host this, the multiple calendars and your willingness to try to accommodate everyone. Really grateful for it. I also want to, because I'm absent, really just congratulate and welcome Janine Van Dingelen in her new role as the PIOB representative. Real pleasure to have her here flying the public interest flag. Tom, I think that the one word that hasn't been spoken about so far in the 1 hour that the meeting has elapsed is this word called Omicron. I must apologize to you that on behalf of the South African scientists and doctors for having discovered it. And of course, we now face the consequences of it mostly. But just so that you have a taste of how serious this is in our country, that our Labor Bureau announced our unemployment statistics this week. They are the highest in the history of South Africa. About half of the young people in South Africa are unemployed. And what's going through now around the world, of course, we see the effect of it in the empty chairs around your table, is that while we suffered the consequences of bad health last year, we're now suffering the consequences of loss of hope. And this really is a real tragedy in the midst of our tourist season, that this is what's happening. I want to just share the reflection with the board, but hope that as you are there and wherever we all are in the world, we remain healthy and we overcome this challenge as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. I was trying to go a board session without mentioning Omicron specifically, but the fact that you're not able to be here with us is a direct reminder of that. So we wish you were able to be here with us, Imran, in person. And thank you for your remarks. Next, Julie.
It's interesting you said Sue, because my first comment is the exact one Sue made. So my first comment, Lem, was on 32 little a. And I think because 31 and 32 are sort of mirror images of each other, I think you need to make the same change you made in 31A to 32A. And then my other comment is also on 38 little b, but it's a bit of a different flavor from what Isabel and Imran referred to. And it's just wondering if we should be splitting apart little b into two pieces, because the first piece you have where you talk about responding to the assessed risk of material misstatement due to fraud. But then you also have this bit about including where there's indicators of potential management bias that have been identified. So I feel like those are two distinct things. Like indicators of management bias often come about as part of your risk assessment process. So maybe one way to solve it for me anyway would be to split those two into two bullets, like a little b and a little c, and then they don't seem as commingled together.
Thanks, Julie. I guess I'm just following your comments, and maybe it's confused me a little bit now what you suggest on 31A, because it doesn't, to me, I just wonder, does it make sense? In the first instance, you're getting stuff that the group auditors determining is right. But in the second instance, isn't it something that the component auditors wish to communicate back? And so you sort of get into that circular argument if you add the clarity that they added in 31A to 32A, right? Am I missing something here?
Yeah, I think, Tom, and obviously this is for the task force to reflect, but I mean, in my mind, 31A is deliberate in terms of the group auditor communicating to a specific component auditor stuff that's relevant if that component the auditor is involved in the risk assessment procedures. Whereas the other way around, I don't think we want to limit it only to component auditors that are involved in risk assessment. We're basically saying component auditors, if there's something we request you that if there's something that you need to highlight to us in terms of our risk assessment at the group level, please inform us about that. So I would say that 32A is by design broader than 31A.
Okay, well, I didn't mean, I just wanted to understand it from a clarity standpoint. And I could have the task force respond to it afterwards, but I needed it just to be able to follow this argument. Wendy.
Thank you, Tom. I have the same exact comment as Julie on 32A with the same exact insert for component auditor determines, and it was about how, you know, how would the communication go from the component to the group unless the component auditor determines that they have to make that communication. So 31A is in the, from group to component, and 31A and 32A is the other way around. So we had the exact same change. I also have all the same paragraphs that have been spoken about, 35B. And we had sent in some recommended changes. The challenge with 35B, it was just confusing as to what the threshold should be, and the language used, the shall not exceed, seemed different than language that we have elsewhere, which is lower than or less than, and it doesn't seem to be the same language that is in the application material. So we did send in a suggested revision that just suggests to take out not exceed and have it be the amount to be lower than, to put lower than in other than not exceed. And so that's 35B. And then 38B, same suggestion as Julie, to separate B into two. So we would have A, B, C, and D, and we sent those suggested changes in because they don't seem to connect in the paragraph together. And then that would help, I think, addressing 38B. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Can I ask you just to put down your name, Tim, please? Okay, Len, back to you. I think I don't think necessarily it is for you to resolve this issue of 31A and 32A right now, but maybe sharing some of your thought process on that point and the other points that were raised would be useful.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, thank you. The Willie came in with that explanation. That was our intent. But I also want to highlight that 32A, that's the area that we receive a number of comments from the board members. So this is one area we're going to take a look. I know there's some helpful suggestions in terms of how we to make it clear in terms of the what type of stuff, what type matters from to report from component auditor to group auditor. So we'll take that. There are a number of comments, and so that's one area that the task force and the staff has already started working on 32A. 38B, I think Aaron, Isabel, Julie, Wendy. That's another area that the staff and the task force have also seen from the comments, and Julie, your suggestion that splitting, we're taking that into consideration. So we spoke, and we'll come back to the board in terms of whether we're clear based on what Aaron and Isabel raised, and also the points that Julie and Wendy raised, and we'll come back with that. But that's one area we also identified based on the reading of the comments we received so far. There were a couple other ones I thought I'd touch on is Chen Wei, that 31B. So that we took that from ISA 550. So we haven't really changed much since, actually, I haven't made any changes since the ED that has been there. So this is one of the one-off comments we received. But as you said, well, task force will look at those one-off comments and see whether more needs to be done. But just want to highlight that. So a couple of comments on the materiality, the aggregation risk, 35A, 35B. And we did see those comments coming through and suggestions, and we'll take a look at that. But one of the things we had decided that at least from the September meeting was this is one area that's probably best to address them outside the standards in terms of dealing with aggregation risk and dealing with equity type of investment. So we have something in there, but leave the door open to further provide with the application material. So that's something that we came away from September meeting. But we're noting those comments on 35A and B, and task force will take another look. With that, I'm going to turn back to you, Tom.
All right. Any other comments on? And make sure you turn the microphone off, please. Sorry. Any other comments on these paragraphs 30 to 44? Oh, Julie, good.
Can I just clarify my comment on 30, sorry, I lost my place, 32A, just for clarity. The concern for me is that there isn't really much of a framework for the component auditor to apply to determine what's relevant to the group audit financial statements. So the risk is that they're going to have to make that determination. They might make it wrong. There might be something later on that someone comes back and says, well, that was relevant, but you didn't communicate it. Or the opposite, they communicate way too much because they want to be totally on the safe side and communicate everything because that could be relevant to the group audit because they just don't know. And then that will become a problem for the group auditor, right? Because they'll have all this information and have to deal with all that information that may or may not be relevant. So I just wanted to clarify, that's my concern there.
It's very helpful.
Yeah, very helpful, because that also came through from other comments from other board members. So with task force, will take a look at that and come back to the board.
Okay, Len, I don't see any other hands or tents. So I think you can proceed.
Okay, so next slide, please. Before we talk about the next section, these are the area that's probably most difficult to follow. Paragraph 45 to 59. I'm sorry, paragraph 59. So I thought, at least with the help of staff and task force member, is we create this flow charts to walk you through in terms of in group auditor, how do you evaluate component auditors' communication and assess the adequacy of the work. If we read in terms of what's there in the standard, so we'll just put some illustration and also refer to some of the specific paragraph in the standards and help you to follow that. Hopefully that with this chart, make it clear to you while you're reading the standards. So the task force noted that in the extant ISA 600 has a subheading evaluating the component auditors' communication and adequacy of their work, and conclude that this was the most appropriate description for the requirements in paragraph 45 to 48 in the current draft of standards presented in front of you. So the group engagement partner takes responsibility for the nature, timing, and extent of the direction and supervision of the component auditors and the review of their work. So this we know this is came from ISO 220. But also this is emphasizing in paragraph 28. So the group auditor or the group engagement partner also are involved in the various communications and reviews of the audit documentation throughout the course of the group audit. So those are the key principle we're focusing on. So you have group auditors request the component auditor to communicate matters relevant to the group auditor's conclusion with regard to the group audit. So that's in paragraph 45. Then the group auditor discuss any significant matters arising from a communication with the component auditor throughout a group audit, including those in accordance with paragraph 45, with the component auditors or with the component management team or group management as appropriate. So that's in paragraph 46, little a. Then if you follow the group auditors and determines whether the communications are adequate for group auditors' purposes. So if they're not adequate, the group auditors consider the implications for the group audit. So paragraph 46b. So as previously noted, the communication may be inadequate for a number of reasons. For example, it may be an indication that more work needs to be done, or that there are issues with the component auditor's competencies and capabilities. So one of the outcomes of considering the implication for the group auditor may be that it is necessary to review additional component audit documentation. So that's in paragraph 47. But in any event, the group auditors still need to determine whether the extent to which it is necessary to review additional component auditors audit documentation in paragraph 47. So this is a positive determination after all the work I described, all the paragraphs before that. So this is a positive determination that this is a critical step in determining whether the component auditor's work is adequate for group audit purposes. So this determination takes into account the guidance in paragraph A72, including the assessed risk of material misstatement of the group financial statements, and a few matters that relate to group auditors' ongoing involvement of the work of the component audit. For example, communication from a component auditor, review of component auditors' audit documentation during the course of the group audit, and by the group manager and group engagement partner in accordance with ISO 220, paragraph 31. So all this is built around what's in paragraph 31 of ISO 220. So group auditor then in a position to determine whether the work of the component auditor is adequate for group audit purposes. So if not, the group auditor determines what additional audit procedure need to be performed and by who. So that's in paragraph 48. So these steps provide the basis for the group auditor's evaluation in accordance with paragraph 51, that sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained from the audit procedure performed, including from the work performed by the component auditors, on which to base the group audit opinion on. So this is special consideration for group audit that feeds into the conclusion required by paragraph 26 of the ISA 330 about whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained.
Your mic went off.
Okay, it's back on. So maybe also look at the next slides as well. The next slide is this a chart that we actually presented in the September meeting based on the discussion. So if you will recall in the September meeting, we had this chart, and to illustrate in terms of the review of the component audit documentations. I think on this chart, you're further aligned in terms of what's in ISA 220 and how that flows through and linked to ISA 600 and ISA 330 that I talk about. So from the top, you have the engagement partner's responsibility for nature, time, extent of a DSR, right? And those are the specific paragraphs. Then you go down and follow the shape of the triangle in terms of what we deal in ISA 600 in the situation I described. Then you determine, the need to review additional component auditors documentation that I'd explain in paragraph 47. So what I had in the last slide and this slide kind of go together. I was wondering, let me pause here with Dan and Jasper, anything else I need to highlight, at least try to get boards, further understanding of how all the paragraphs link together by bringing 220 and into 600 and some of the linkage to ISA 330. Dan, do you have any further?
Len, the only other thing I would say is I think it's up to the board to react to that first diagram that you went through to see if it is indeed helpful in terms of describing the flow or the sequence of procedures or thought processes to ultimately get down to the evaluation of whether the work of the component auditor is adequate for the group auditor's purposes. And then that feeds in, as Len said, into the evaluation in paragraph 51 as to whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained. And the orange box at the top of that slide is particularly important. If we could maybe go back one slide, that to note that there's a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of interaction and involvement of the group auditor and the group engagement partner with the component auditors throughout the course of the engagement. And you can't dismiss what has been learned through the course of those interactions. Very important. And then the rest of the blue boxes on the blue diagrams or symbols on this slide are simply to put into some context the flow of the requirements in that particular section of the standard. But to highlight that it starts with all the information that you are aware of and have become aware of and known because of the interactions that have taken place already. The only other point that I would make on this slide is that paragraph 47 kind of sits right in the middle of this, and it's an important consideration. As Len said, it's a positive determination that has to be made in every case as to whether a deeper dive is needed to review additional component auditor documentation. That's in addition to what has already been done throughout the course of the engagement, whether it's in relation to specific requirements in the standard, the component auditor's involvement in risk assessment procedures, for example, or their design and performance of further audit procedures, those types of things, or any other reviews that the group auditor or group engagement partner deemed necessary throughout the course of the engagement. So it was this task force's attempt to try to put this in some context for the board to explain the changes that were made here.
One thing I'd say that I saw people on the screen in the Zoom call struggling to look at the little box. So I think we've asked the slides to be sent around to those participated, so you can have them printed out or on bigger slides in front of you. So do you know, Billy, if that's happening?
Yeah, Armand is working on that. So we'll send out the slides and then we'll do that for the sessions during the course of the week as well.
Okay. Back to you, Len.
So with that explanation and also Dan's very helpful, explanations. So next, actually, the next, can you fast forward 2 slides? Or next one. Actually, go back one more. Apology. It's a lot the one before. Yeah. So we're going to take comments on 45 to 59, including the illustration we walked through. But before we do that, I just want to touch on a few changes in the sections. In paragraph 46, the task force revised the wording of paragraph 46.8 to clarify that the discussion about significant matters arising from a communication with a component auditor include those in accordance with paragraph 45, and also to clarify with whom those discussions will take place. The task force also moved paragraph 46 of the September draft to paragraph 46B and revised the wording to focus on the implications of the group audit if the communication are not adequate for the group auditor's purposes. And the task force decided to broadly refer to implication to recognize that the communications may be inadequate for a number of reasons. For example, this may be an indication that more work needs to be done, or that are issues with the component auditor's competency and capabilities, which I described as we walk through the illustrations. Paragraph 47, task force revised the intro wording as the determination required by paragraph 47 is not based solely on evaluation in paragraph 46B in the September's turnaround draft. And then lastly, paragraph 54, the task force added reference to an overview of the work to be performed at the components of the group audit for competency with paragraph 57A, and to add a board comment that previous wording that was too broad and could lead into overly detailed discussion about the planned work effort at each component. So with that, those changes and the 2 illustrations we just did, Tom, I'll turn back to you for comments.
Okay, comments on paragraphs 45 to 59. You should, I think I saw that the presentation was sent around too, if you ever had a hard time seeing it on the screen. Fernando.
Thank you, Tom. And Len, I read 45, 46, 47, and I thought I understood how it flowed, like group auditor doing the communication, component auditor responding, and then you as a group, you decide what to do next. But you're just looking at the flow chart, now I'm lost, because you could go right, you could go left, you could go down, it goes back again. And now I'm concerned if I'm just reading something which is pretty simple and the actual message is more complicated of what we have in the papers. Just want to express that I got a little bit concerned with the flowchart. I know it's not part of the papers that will circulate, but not really sure if I'm just reading what it is supposed to be the outcome of the requirements.
Sachika.
Hello, everybody from Tokyo. First of all, this is my first time to comment today. Thank you very much for tremendous work for our task force. I think it's very, very responsive to board comment we made previously. And also, similar to Isabel, I'm a little bit sad because I'm not in the boardroom, but at least I'm very happy to see that, many are in the boardroom after such a long time. So I hope to see you in face-to-face in the near future in the next year. My comment is on paragraph 46B. But by the way, I strongly support the direction of this section. I really like this section. But my comment relates to more on the wording on paragraph 46B. And my suggestion is to keep the reference to paragraph 45 as the previous version of the draft, because I heard a question from some Japanese practitioner to ask, what is the purpose of this paragraph? And it seems they confuse the intention, because paragraph 46A refers to the component auditor, component management, and group management. But paragraph 46B only refers to the component auditor. And I know paragraph 46A already have a reference to paragraph 45, but having same reference to 45 in paragraph 46B will address some question about the intention. So I think it's helpful if the task force can take a look at that. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachiko. Diane?
Thanks, Tom. Len, I'm a big fan of the decision tree. As you may or may not be surprised by my comment. I had the complete opposite reaction from Fernando, which was I was confused when I read it. And I kept going back to what really is the expectation of that group auditor. And this is a very, very important part of the requirements, really trying to, when I put my practitioner hat on, what do I need to do? And so I put extra attention to these paragraphs. And I do think I was a bit confused as to what we were asking the group auditors to do and what are, unfortunately, if you get something back and you're not quite sure, then what might happen. I think Dan used the word sequencing. Sequencing is very, very important, because I think many times in reality, your view of that component team is not black and white from day one. As you have interactions with that component team, or as the component auditor having interactions with the group auditor, your relationship and your communication will change over time. And I think the sequencing is really critical. So I am very, very supportive of the decision tree. I want to go back and just really read it carefully and make sure I'm comfortable with it. I do think the other key element to think about is making sure it's crystal clear that this needs to be done for each component. It's not as if I'm only going to talk to these components. When you're signing up for this, that group auditor has to think about each of the component teams. So I would just ask us to reflect on incorporating that into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Taiue?
Tom, thanks. I have a comment to paragraph 45 little k. And in relation to this paragraph and paragraph 59 little h, I know that the paragraph A10 would now include situation in which the auditor of the financial statements of an entity or a business unit would give an opinion on the financial statements. In addition, in some jurisdictions like Germany, an opinion of the financial statements consolidated in the group financial statements may be required in some circumstances. For these reasons, and because the lack of the word opinion suggests that such opinions are no longer permitted, I believe that the words or opinion need to be reinserted into paragraphs 45 little k and 59 little h. Another solution would be to clarify in the application material in paragraph A 144 that local law or regulation or the group auditor's firm policies or procedures may address the form or specific wording of an opinion or overall conclusion statement from the component auditor on the audit work performed for purposes of the group audit. That would help for my jurisdiction very much. Thanks, Tom. Back to you.
Thank you. Sue?
Thanks. I also wanted to support the diagrams that you've got, Len. I found them helpful. Fernando, I recognise that they are complicated, but the situations can be complicated and varied. So I actually thought they were a useful visual summary. So thank you for that. I had a small point on 59C. We suggested splitting that into 2 bullets. It's already quite a long list. But I think it was confusing what the phrase, the basis of determination of, applies to, whether it applies to both performance materiality and the threshold for communication, or whether it's just the performance materiality, which is what I think it probably is. So I think it's a fairly simple fix. Thanks.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. So I like the flow in the new paragraphs in the section 45 to 59. I don't know if I like the flow chart because I couldn't see it all that well. So I'm glad that we are distributing it. I tried to grasp it, but I do usually like pictorials. So I think it will be a good add potentially for the implementation material. And then I also had some other minor points in 46A, and this is probably implementation material comment as well. I wanted to confirm this would not mean that the group auditor takes over and cuts out the component auditor. Some of the practitioners I spoke to were concerned about that. So that's just a comment that I don't really have a suggested fix in the standard, but could be addressed in implementation material. Another point in 46 and 48, I like the word sufficient better than adequate for some reason. And I sent that in as well. I think it's probably because of the sufficiency of audit evidence. I'm stuck on the word sufficient as opposed to adequate. And I feel like I know adequate is in the standard elsewhere, but I'm not sure it's in the same context of adequate versus sufficient. So recommending sufficient, go back. And then I do have a similar comment as Sue in 59C, and I sent through some recommendations similar to what Sue suggested should change. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel.
Thank you. My comment also relates to the use of adequate, and now it has a particular focus because above paragraph 45, we have a subtitle that stands evaluating the component auditor's communication and the adequacy of their work. So the adequacy has a specific focus. And then we have to evaluate whether the communication with component auditor is adequate for the group purpose. I went back to extant ISA 600, and I don't think we used adequate with a specific meaning. So maybe should we expand on what we mean by adequate, because several people that read the draft struggled with the exact meaning. Usually in our standards, we use adequate in the common sense, like adequate disclosure, adequate planning. Here, I think we wanted to have a specific meaning in the context of a group audit, but we miss any development around that. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to pause here 1 second. Len, would you like us to continue with the comments, or do you want to respond to what you've heard so far? And then we have about half the people who aren't on the task force commented at this point.
I can address some of the comments now. So maybe there's some repeated comments. So I'll do that. So maybe now in particular order. Some of the comments raised, we actually have seen them through the comments you sent to us earlier. I think on Kai-Wu, on your example about inserting the word opinion, I had a chance to catch up with Wolf. I think that's very specific to the German situation, but we'll rely on our discussion with Wolf to see anything needs to be done in 45K and 59H. On the flow chart, there's some split views in terms of whether it's helpful, whether it's not helpful. We we actually modified the slides based on the comments we saw coming through. And in fact, we're working on the slides this morning. So maybe there's some fine tuning need to do, but largely we're trying to help the board to understand the language and the flow in those paragraphs. And some mixed views, but we as a task force, whether we can decide based on board's input whether it's helpful, it's not helpful, maybe what we can do. Because I heard Wendy says it might be good for implementation guidance in your remark. If that's the case, maybe we need to go back and look at, make sure we're not adding any confusions and what we wrote in those paragraphs. But some people do think it's helpful, so that's also encouraging. I think we saw some comments from, coming through, Sashiko, your comments are raised in 45, especially 46B. I think that also came through from other board members. So this is one area we're further discussing in our task force in terms of 45 and referencing in 46B, whether needs some more clarification and to address. I think your suggestion is to revert back. So that's one. And Diane, thank you very much because your comments trigger us the thoughts in terms of providing a flow chart. And so thank you for the support. At least we took your comments very serious, because if you're reading it and you're confused, and that triggered the whole process of creating that chart. No, actually, it put us on notice. And also suggestion, building into, it has to be done on every component would take that as well. I'm trying to see any other comments. Sue, those comments you raised in 59C, thank you for that, because you also discussed with us last week face-to-face on Zoom call, and she's not in her room, but we were taking that into consideration by the task force. So, and Isabel, the language adequate, thank you for raising that, and I guess we as a task force will take a look. But Josephine, I know you have a view.
Actually, if I may, Tom, I wouldn't mind further clarity on what the concern is here. Obviously, adequate for the audit purpose is used throughout our standard. It's not a new phrase. So it's really just clarity as to what the issue is with the wording that we have in the standard here now.
I think Isabel raised it first. So Isabel, would you like to respond to Josephine?
Yes, thank you. The concern was, do we include in this word adequate here something different from what we usually use? So do we expect some characteristic to be demonstrated to show that what has been obtained is adequate for the group auditor's purpose?
well, my personal view is not, but to Len's point, I guess we have to go back and have a little think about that and whether you've got sufficient support for that. But we're using it in the same context it's used throughout the ISAs at the moment, but we can obviously have another look. Thank you.
Okay. I just, we had a lot of comments there. So I felt like we needed a break for a second. Roger?
Thanks, Tom. My first time speaking, so greetings from Sydney. Sad that I can't be there with the other board members who's in New York. The first time speaking reflects the fact that very comfortable with the requirements, so well done to the task force in that regard. Responding specifically to the question on the flowchart, Len, I actually found it useful. So this is quite a dynamic, interactive area. Which is, it struggles to capture it when you've got words outlaid in paragraphs. So I thought it was useful in that regard. I'd have to give negative assurance. Nothing came to my attention that it was incorrect or incomplete. Haven't had a chance to reflect, but I do think this is a complex area which could be aided by some sort of visual decision aid. So thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Next, Julie.
Thanks, Tom. And I was with Fernando on the flow chart. I thought I understood all those paragraphs pretty well. But I will say I need to go and look at the flow chart a little bit more. And I always like a flow chart and a picture. So I'm sure it'll be helpful. I just need to spend a little time making sure my understanding of those paragraphs is what the flow chart represents, and I'm not confused. And then my only other comment, Len, was 59 little c, and it's the exact same comment that's already been raised. So that was all I had.
Thanks, you, Julie. Lynn.
Good morning, everybody, and greetings from New Zealand. Like others who can't travel, I am very sad not to be in New York with you all, and that's a reality for some of us, but it's great that many of you can be there in person. This is my first time speaking and may well be my only time speaking, so can I thank the task force for this work. It's obviously been well thought through and well considered, and can I also acknowledge the excellent work that's been done by the staff. I had very few comments on the draft, and it had nothing significant enough to put through to this meeting. But I will only be reacting to what I'm hearing or what I'm seeing. I am a visual person, so I, of course, always like diagrams. On the second diagram, I liked that at the last meeting. I also like it now. I just wonder why it doesn't go back to requirement 28, which is the setup about the taking responsibility for DSR. And I think that would strengthen that diagram, or I may have misinterpreted it. In terms of the flow chart, I sit somewhere between everybody, I think. It seems all right, but I haven't had a careful enough study of it to actually have a strong opinion on it. So I will certainly have another look over the next few days. I do have a question on those two diagrams, whether it's intended to use them any further than just this presentation. Are there any plans to either use them as appendices to the standard or as first-time implementation guidance? Thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Lynn. Imran?
Thank you. My comment relates to our new paragraph 47. This is an issue that I have raised before in its previous incarnation when it referenced 45B. I'm pleased that the reference to 45B is being removed, and thank you for that. I think it helps simplify it. But the issue that around the conditionality in 47 remains largely unaddressed. And I appreciate that not much is going to be done at this stage anymore on the project. But want to highlight the feedback that I received again from those who are involved in external inspection, saying that this creates a significant challenge for them, especially in relation to expectations, and it almost certainly guarantees some implementation challenges, this conditionality. I still work at a regulator. We still perform firm level engagements. And this remains a significant worry for our inspectors about whether indeed, after a practitioner applies paragraph 47, whether they will indeed review any additional component audit documentation, or whether the other requirements in the standard will be is where they will stop. I make that point because it's reflected in the minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Imran. Kai?
Thank you. This is my first time speaking, as I am very comfortable with the direction that the task force has been heading to, similar to some others not sent any comments through. So my comment will be specifically on the flow chart. I think that the flow chart is a good way of visualizing what is a complex area to understand in the paragraphs. But similar to Fernando and Julie, I think I need some more time to see that it is telling the same story as we have in the paragraphs. It might be okay, but we need to see. Need to do some more study on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kai. On the flow chart, though, my understanding is that it was meant to be helpful for those in this room to understand how the requirements actually work in terms of thought process and gating requirements. Yes, no, if something is the case, you know, other. So, you know, whether it's used for other purposes after this meeting, that's to be decided by the task force and others. But to me, it was like, if you read the language, this is how the task force visualizes the thought process of the group auditor throughout. That was my take. Imran, your point is noted for the record. I think we talked about this issue significantly at the last meeting. And the challenges of removing the word whether were raised significant last meeting. It's, at least from my standpoint, I got significant comfort from IFERs, our discussions with the IFER, the CAOB, and others as it relates to language in that standard. But your point is noted for the record, and I'm sure Len and the task force will respond. And then there were a couple of other comments, but still generally broad support for the direction that these paragraphs are going in. Len?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And again, that was the charge to try to be helpful for this discussion. Definitely not meant to be creating any confusion. So I know that board members may not have a chance to digest. So of course we don't know how we're going to use the chart, if we're going to use them. But you know, for those who feel confused or feel need more time, you know, feel free to let us know once you have a chance to go through them. But we thought it was important because based on our discussion in the last meeting, also very helpful comments from Diane that triggered our thoughts, and she was confused, but hopefully our charts get her over the hump. But we thought because she raised it, we think it's a compelling reason at least to present something for this board to at least visualize what's in the words. And Lynn, you talked about the take responsibility reference in the chart. We did have that. It's it's actually referred to ISA 220, I guess paragraph 29. We have that at the top end. engagement partner taking responsibility. Just want to let you know, because we take that very seriously. Josephine, to keep us honest, make sure we refer back to 220, having that requirements in there. So it's in there. And Julie, the 59C, I think Sue was not in the room when I commented on that, because we had a chance to spoke to Sue last week, and the 59C we'll take a look at similar comments that he raised. Roger, thank you for your comments and supportive in terms of something visual, and your negative assurance is a good one. Thank you. The last thing I want to talk about is the weather wording that Tom addressed, Enron raised, and be assured that issue 47, the word weather, we actually discussed in every single task force meeting we had since September, and you know, we're reflecting on all the comments we heard from all the board members, including our outreach, and so that's still the position of the task force. But we take no Enron's your comments on the public record, and as Tom said, you know, we will consider all the comments, but at the end of the day, you know, we also reflecting majority of board members in terms of their views on that particular wording in a particular paragraph. My view is you have to read the whole thing in totality, 600, rather than just that particular sentence with the word weather in there. But we note your comments, and thank you for that, and you know, we appreciate your continued passion about that wording in that paragraph. So with that, Tom, I think we're done with the requirement section. At least I haven't seen anybody raising any hands or 10 cards.
Could you, Len, if you turn your mic off for a second, I just want to confirm, does anyone else, as I remember, it was Imran last time on this question of weather, but the other members of the board were supportive of the language as is. And I just want to make sure that it was aired fully, but our position stands as a board based upon the evidence we've gathered. That it's the great majority of the board that are very comfortable with the language in that paragraph. I think it's now, it was by 45A forever, but it's now 48. 47, I'm sorry. It was 48 in one draft, I thought, but I don't see any hands up. I just want to make sure that we're comfortable. It's not just that a small majority was, it was that the whole board was comfortable based upon what we heard. And remember, a lot of the discussion last time was about translation, issues with translation, how it would be interpreted, and also comfort that we received from our other dialogue from regulators that seems to have been confirmed between now, from, I guess it was the September board meeting till today. Okay, so that's reflected for the record. Now, one of the things I asked people's indulgence as chair in terms of following the rules. Of course, I may not be following the schedule, but I do think it's a great opportunity for a small break right now in between the requirements paragraphs and the A paragraphs, the application guidance paragraphs section. What I suggest, it's 3:53 Eastern time. I suggest that we reconvene at 4:10 Eastern time. So it's about a 17-minute break. So I look forward to speaking to you in 17 minutes again. And thank you for everyone joining. Yeah. Okay, no, we're gonna try to get back in a couple minutes. One more minute, please. Natalie, could you ask people to come in? Can we all take our seats, please? I'm conscious that people on the Zoom call, it's late in the night for many of you. Okay, as we start back up, I know Jim Dalkin has an engagement that he has to go to at 5. We just finished the requirements. So I figured it would be a good idea to share his perspective on behalf of the CAG as on the requirements.
Thanks, Tom. And Lynn, I think we've been on this 6-year journey with you, because I think you've met with us many, many times over that journey. And I just wanted to reflect a couple of points. One is early on, we had a number of comments, and particularly in the area of communication and then in documentation. And fast forward to 6 years later, almost, the last time this came up at a CAG meeting, the CAG was very supportive of where you have gone and the improvements that have been made from the task force. And so if I had to characterize where the CAG was, usually I like to come here with a lot of points, but I really don't have any. And I think that shows that our support. So thank you for those 6 years.
It was you couldn't call it a sojourn. It's it was a long journey, but a good one. Len, back to you.
Yeah, thank you for the comments in the requirement sections. 6 years ago, I wasn't on the board. I was drafted to as an independent person, a corresponding member. So I think Josephine and Wolf for the TA at that time. So anyway, moving on, application material. So we're going to be focusing on the A1 to A26 for your comments. So everything from the scope of the ISAs all the way before we talk about the leadership responsibility of the engagement, a group engagement partner. So in this area, just highlight a few changes we made. Paragraph A10, the task force deleted the third sentence as it was deemed unnecessary given the proposed standards focusing on the group auditor and not what the component auditor may do for a separate audit of the financial statement for different purposes at the component level. Paragraph A13 to A17, task force made changes to improve the clarity of the flow of the application material related to professional skepticism as described in agenda item 2A. And just want to thank the professional skepticism working group for all their input as part of the process. And paragraph A19, task force, we received comments from our September board papers, some wording for additional clarity and consistency with other paragraphs in the standards. Then finally, in A22, the task force added a sentence for clarification in response to the board members' comments from September. So So with that, Tom, I'll turn back to you for board's input on those paragraphs, A1 to A26.
Thank you, Len. If you could just take the mic. Comments, Fernando.
Thank you, Tom. And Len, it's really a question about consistency. And I picked up the phrase work, I think it's work, can I miss that? Audit procedure and audit work is used across the whole document. And I think we had some discussion in previous meetings, but I cannot remember the rationale when to use each one of the phrases. And I'm just curious if they mean the same, or how do we explain the work effort to practitioners if they ask about it? I can't remember when to use it, or each one of the phrases. Thank you.
Len, do you want to just quickly respond to this team? Have a response to that? That's just a clarification question.
Yeah, I think, Dan Jasper, correct me, I'm also wrong if you want to supplement. The way, I think we went through a document, we tried to be, look at every phrase, all the work and all the procedures were used. I think the focus has been, the all the work is, for example, that certain requests from the group auditor and the component auditor in terms of, I think when we look at it, client acceptance, in terms of understanding during the audit planning, some of the risk assessment procedures, outside the regular performance of the audit in terms of performance standards in the ISA. So some of the things are at the front end in terms of planning, in terms of acceptance, continuance. That's how we differentiate the difference between work and procedure. But Jasper and Dan, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, Len, so we indeed used work is more broader than procedure. Procedure is more specific. And that's why we went through the standard, as you mentioned, Len, and we checked everything.
Fernando, does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Okay, Wendy.
Thank you, Tom. I did go through the standard between work and procedures to see if it made sense, because I did see a lot of those changes, and I think it does for the ones that I was looking at. In this section, I only have one comment, and it's on A19. And I agree, Len, it does do what you said about consistency and clarity with other paragraphs. I was concerned it didn't really address the definition of component. You kind of get there reading through what the application material says in this paragraph of A19. So that was my only comment. And perhaps here's another plug for implementation material. Maybe it's in there, because I tried to come up with a suggestion for what the application material should say related to the definition. And it gets very tricky because of it gets very hard to say what a component is versus what it isn't and give examples. So I'm not suggesting we change it, but I do think that the practitioners are going to be wanting for more expansion on the definition of what a component is. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai?
Thank you. My comment relates to the last bullet, so A16, and the example that's there when we talk about the exercise of professional skepticism. I don't know if it's only my reading of the example that is there, but the way that I read it and interpret it almost sounds like an excuse and acceptance for not doing the work that you should have done. It's also the only bullet that has an example on it. So whether it is needed to have the example there, or if the the wording of the example should be rephrased.
Thank you, Ty. Julie?
I had the exact same paragraph that I wanted to raise. I think it's a bit awkward that we're saying that professionals aren't going to, exhibit what they need to for professional standards, or it's written in a negative way. And to Kai's point, I think it could be read that this is just a fact, and if I fit into this fact pattern, it's just a fact. That's what happened to me during the audit. We sent through a suggestion to flip it, still make the point, but flip it in a positive way to say you will need to take time, as opposed to in the negative context, which is what it is right now.
Thank you. Sue?
Thanks. I also had the point on A16, that final bullet, stumbled over the drafting a bit, and I think we've sent a suggestion through. I also had a point, and it's probably around A10A, but I think, Len, in previous board discussions, you've talked about equity method investments and some of those things being covered in implementation guidance. But we've also talked about the fact that we need a hook in the application material to then lead into the application, into the implementation guidance. And I think something around A10A, that the reference is just something about the nature and extent of the work will depend on the proportion of ownership or the share of the profits or losses of the equity investment, would then provide that hook into the implementation guidance that I understand we're going to produce. Thanks.
Thanks. So I see no other hands physically or digitally. Definitely have to find, haven't heard all the comments on, is it A16, that paragraph. Certainly would prefer in a more positive stance myself. Len, do you want to respond to everything?
Yeah, I think A16 last bullet, I mentioned earlier, there was some comments that the staff had already gone through them, and that's one of the ones that we actually started to make some changes. So that's the one we already identified. And the other one, Sue, the hook in the application material for equity and implementing guidance outside the standards. So yeah, this is something we'll look at it, and we'll discuss with task force what type of hook would need to be in A10. So we'll bring that to the task force attention. But thank you. You raised that in our call last week, was helpful. Thank you.
I think you can proceed.
Okay, so the next section is next slides. It's A27 to A43. So in this sections, there were a number of changes. Let's quickly go through them. Paragraph A29, the task force changed the construct of the paragraph by starting with the reference to the foundational standards and moving the first sentence to the end. So in doing so, the task force revised the wording to improve readability and also align more closely with ISA 220, paragraph 828. As you probably know, that there was, leading up to this agenda paper being issued, the staff has done a lot more work in terms of alignment with 220. So this is one of them. Paragraph 830, the task force added reference to components that are accounted for by the equity method to emphasize that restrictions on access to information or people at these components may present challenges to obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So this is the one I think a number of board members raised at the September meeting to recognize the equity invested entities. Paragraph 833, task force added a sentence to highlight that it may be more complex to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence in a group audits, laws and regulation may restrict the component auditor to provide information outside its jurisdiction or through war, civil unrest, or outbreak of disease, which throughout the ED to current day, that's a real life example. How that all that situation, laws, regulation, war, civil unrest, disease may restrict the group auditors access to relevant information at the component level. Paragraph 838, the task force addressed concerns about breaching confidentiality provisions, so we made that change. 840, the task force, we added a bullet to discuss with management when restrictions related to uncontrolled interest in entity that is accounted for by the equity method that cannot be overcome, and provide whether it's appropriate to use the equity method accounting if the management can't even access or exercise control. So whether they should be using the non-controlled with the equity basis of accounting. So that's one that we added. The task force of the view that this discussion would be appropriate given that management should be able to have significant influence. So with that, turn it back to you, Tom, for comments in this section 827 to 843.
Thank you, Len. Chun-Wei?
Thank you, Tom. Sorry, just scrolling back. So I would like to make 3 quick comments on this section. The first one is A27, the removal of appropriately skilled or suitably experienced. I understand that this is a change so that we're consistent with 220 paragraph 15, but these wordings are reflected in 220 in paragraph 9, and in explain what shall take responsibility for actually means. So I feel that it's important and will be helpful to retain these wordings in this application material. So would request that the task force reconsider this part. Next comment is a small one, it's A30 and actually A34 as well. There's a reference to the term component information. As we know, component auditor, component management, and component, these 3 have been defined in the definition, but there's no definition of component information. We may say that it is understood, but I'm just wondering whether, because it only happened 2 times, this component information, based on my search, only appeared 2 times in the application material. Should we just say information about the component? So just a minor suggestion for consideration. My the last point I would like to make is in relation to the addition that Len has just mentioned, the added bullet to A40 on the non-controlling interest. I guess it's just, I took a pause here. I guess it's just a matter of clarification. I wasn't sure if this is entirely appropriate. I went back to the financial reporting standards under IAS 28. If you have more than 20% holding, then the onus of proof is actually on the management that there is no significant influence. So I was just wondering whether this new bullet is appropriate in light of the IAS 28 requirements. And I guess the question is significant influence and noting that there's not control, does it actually guarantee access to information or people? So I know that it's just a suggestion for the group auditor to have a discussion, but in light of the accounting requirement, I mean, the group management might say, given that you're challenging it, maybe we shouldn't account for it under the equity method. But the onus of proof is actually on them to say that it's not. So it's just a question in my mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Chun-Wei. I want to know, I know a couple people have raised this point, this new second bullet in their comments to the task force. So could I pause here and let's get some comments on this point? I'm not going to forget you. You're not going to you could raise other issues, but I want to deal with this issue first. So by show of, I know Roger, you want to come in on this point, right? Even if you have other topics, will you just comment on the second bullet, A40, second bullet here, and then we could get other points back. Do you want to come in, Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I had the same concern as Chun-Wei. I saw this as really an accounting requirement, which is defined in the accounting standards. It seemed that this was an additional consideration that we were imposing and might cause some consideration. So my recommendation would be to remove this particular bullet. I don't think we should be setting additional considerations for the accounting requirements within the auditing standards. Thanks.
Does anyone else want to come in on this point? Julie?
I also struggled with it as well. And maybe just to add another flavor to my struggle was that could this wording actually imply that if management just simply changed the accounting, your issue might go away and move on with it? And that wouldn't be the right answer either. So my suggestion would be just to delete it.
Sue?
I was of the alternative view, actually. I thought this was quite helpful. I mean, it's one of the few levers you have in practice when you're trying to get access to information. And as part of the audit, you are considering whether there has been appropriate accounting for it. So I personally found this a useful addition.
Oh, I want to get some other viewpoints on this topic. Anyone on Zoom want to talk on this topic? Sachiko?
Thank you. I'm with Chun-Wei and Roger and Julie, because I also think it seems to suggest, we are providing interpretation of the requirement in the financial reporting framework. And I think the requirement in IFRS is not talking about from the context of whether a group management has ability to access to the information. And I know it's not the intention, but the description may cause a misunderstanding that to the reader that the group can avoid application of equity method to the component if the condition described in this sentence exists. So my suggestion is to remove the bullet. Thank you.
Okay, we've heard people calling for removal of the bullet, but I also see Josephine and Edo's Ted's come up. So, and I believe you're both on the task force. So Josephine, maybe you give some context to this.
So I recognize that we could probably soften the wording, but essentially it is exactly what Sue's saying. It is actually, I believe, helpful because it is one of the few levers that auditors have when they're assessing management's assertion as whether the assertions made by management are appropriate in the context of the financial reporting framework. And most of them are similar. And to have significant influence, in fact, is to participate in the financial and operating policies. But I think we can step back with being specific to some extent. We've already at the task force meeting talked about some alternative wording to get us to a better place. If we think about ISA 540, throughout ISA 540, there are continuous references to various methods, assumptions, judgments that have to be made in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. So all the way through that standard, we're challenging management's assertions and how they're accounting for estimates. I'm looking at Dan to make sure I haven't got that completely wrong. And so in this particular regard, the whole point of the audit is to examine whether the financial statements are prepared in accordance with the financial reporting framework. And all we're helping out here is to remind that you do have that challenge that you can make of management in this situation. If management has absolutely no access to information, then in accordance, taking IAS 28, for example, arguably they don't have power to participate in the financial and operating policies of the organization. So in which case you would say, have you actually really thought this through? Is this the right assertion? Now, to Julie's point, therefore the other side of this is, well, if they then say, okay, fine, we won't account for it that way, then quite simply, in most reporting requirements, it says costs, which you probably can actually find more evidence for to support it. So it's not to say the problem goes away, but it might be easier for you to find sufficient appropriate audit evidence in a situation where they reassess whether their assertion is appropriate in the first place. So that's why we thought it would be a helpful addition to the application material for EMIs. Thank you, Tom.
Edo, would you like to add to that?
Yes, and I clearly entirely agree with what Josephine says, but I also think this is one of the areas where we emphasize, look, auditor, here is where you need to be professional and skeptical about what management is doing. This is assessing potentially contradictory information against each other. Well, this says this, but the fact pattern here is that you have nothing to show for it. So that's why I strongly feel that something like this should be in the standards. We can play with words, definitely, but I'm a strong proponent of keeping something to this tune.
Thank you, Edo. Diane, I see you nodding your head over there, so you may have a sympathetic view towards what
Josephine was very convincing. My first reaction, honestly, was this sounds very accounting-ish, and I wasn't quite sure it had a place. But the more that you're spot on, right? Because equity method investing means you have influence, right? And you have very specific accounting. You're picking up percentage of their revenues, their losses, and if they can't then provide you access, then to Edo's point, it's a direct contradiction. How can you have influence when you don't even know what's going on and you don't have the financial records? So in that side, I came back from an accounting to an auditing matter. And so I'm okay with it if we want to think about the exact wording, that's fine. But I absolutely appreciate the comment, and I actually think it does have a place in here. Thank you.
So for Chun-Wei and Roger and Julie, who sort of started this good discussion, I think what's being proposed is that the task force thinks it's appropriate that there's some discussion on it in the application material, but some reconsideration of the wording that you would come back. Could you live with that? Does that make sense as a path forward? Roger?
Always happy to consider additional wording. Look, if they have chosen this, they may have some basis of accounting. If they're using the equity method, they must have some basis of doing it. And so there might be a lack of sufficient appropriate evidence around this. If it can be put into more of an auditing flavour, as distinct from an accounting flavour, that would be very beneficial.
Okay, I see Julie nodding her head. So she
I feel the same way. I mean, as written, I struggle with it. If there were some alternative presented, I'd be happy to look at it. And I agree with all the points that have been made on the other side.
Josephine, you were very convincing, I guess. Note to self on that. Okay, I didn't mean to cut off the conversation, but I knew that was an area that people would want to come in on. I think we got guided. So anyone who would like to comment on other parts of these paragraphs, feel free to have your 10 card up, your hands up digitally. We'll go to Wendy right now.
Now, you might not have realized I wanted to come in on 840 as well, but we had sent through some suggestions on how to rewrite bullet 2. We think it is appropriate, but as written, a little confusing between the accounting and the auditing. So that, and then I just had a minor comment on A27. Consider whether explicit inclusion of component auditors should be repeated like it is in paragraph 11. So I sent in a suggestion, members of the engagement team, including component auditors, because that seemed to be a theme we had earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Imran.
Thank you. The sections that we're currently looking at, I've got 2 comments on paragraph 838. And once I've made these, I'm going to go backwards again because I missed the earlier call for comments on the earlier section, with apologies. So on 838, I have shared these comments in advance with the task force, but I thought that there was an example in 839 that we needed to carry through in the language in 838, and that was when we look at this additional information that we plan to use, I thought that the language is a little bit loose in suggesting that could be any kind of information, rather needed to be information to be used as audit evidence. So to be clear, 839 has the words to be used as audit evidence, and I'm proposing that those words also be inserted in the second and third bullets in 838. So all we're trying to do is make 838 consistent with 839. It describes the same circumstances. That's my first set of comments. My next one that I missed earlier, and apologies for this, is what refers to A15, Len. I have provided this comment also in advance, and I thought that to just direct the task force please to consider whether there was not an inconsistency between A15 and paragraph 9, the requirements in paragraph 9, and the inconsistency related to the mention of component auditors in A15 and the absence of any mention of component auditors in paragraph 9. There may be a technical reason why it's left out, in which case I'll accept that, but I just wanted to point that out. Lastly, Len, this change that we made to the definition of 14C, in paragraph 14C, we made some deletions there. And we have the same application material supporting 14C as we did in September. I wonder whether some of the helpful explanation that has been written in 2A ought not to be added to the application paragraph in 820. So let me repeat that. We've made a deletion in 14C. I agree with the deletion. We've explained that deletion very well in the board papers in document 2A. However, we've not made any change in the standard explaining the deletion. And I'm proposing that some of the explanation that's in 2A could make its way into paragraph 820. So leaving that with the task force for its consideration, please. And I think I have provided all of those comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Diane.
Thanks, Tom. My comment is on paragraph 833. And this one is really just suggesting that we might want to split out two different topics. One is if you're restricted from being able to get to work papers because laws and regs, and one might be you might be prevented from accessing work papers due to civil unrest or outbreaks of disease. And the reason I mention this is when you kick us over to A177, all those solutions may not work when you are restricted from access to work papers because of laws and regs. And I know recently in the last couple months, and maybe even the last month, there's been some recent changes in the privacy restrictions relative to China. And so that's creating, quite frankly, some challenges in terms of the ability to get to those work papers. So I would just suggest this could become more of a significant issue, split laws and regs, and then offer up some solutions as to what to do, which might mean the group auditor actually has to do more versus using technology, which is one of the suggestions to overcome the situations where disease or civil unrest, prevents you from accessing it. So just a fine-tune separation on that paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Julie?
Thank you. Len, a couple things in this section. In A27, my preference would be to reinstate the three references in there to responsibilities, because without those words, it feels like it's reading as if the component auditors are just assigned things to do. So they're assigned procedures or assigned tasks or assigned actions. And I think we want to make sure that it's clear that they also have responsibilities as well. And they're not just executing on things they've been asked to do. So that was just one in A27. I know we struck that out, but I was wondering if we could consider putting that back in, those three references. And then in paragraphs A39 and A40, and I'll just start this by saying, Len, you and the task force have done a great job at making changes in this section. And I know I've raised this a number of times on previous board calls around these paragraphs, but I think for me, there's still a point of clarity needed. And the clarity I'm looking for is when you get to the bottom of A39, it starts to talk about whether the auditor can overcome the restrictions to enable the group auditor to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. I don't know if the auditor has to overcome restrictions in order to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, or that they can do that, they can obtain the evidence, but still the restrictions exist. So if we think it's that, then that's fine. But I think as written, that's not exactly what it says. Or if we think you actually always have to overcome the restrictions, that to me is a different point. Because I think you can still have the restrictions, but get your evidence in various ways, some of them being explained in the paragraph. And then when I get to A40, we talked about A40 already, sorry. I think that was it. I think that was it all I had, Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, Len, back to you to respond.
Yeah, thank you. I think that A40, thank you, Tom, for giving the board's, priority in terms of voicing their concerns on A40. We actually had a long discussion yesterday in a task force meeting. That's why Josephine et al. They raised their hand because I was in the same camp as well as Josephine and et al. So we'll go back and look at some of the suggestions that came through, and we'll turn around and come back and offer what we discussed at the board meeting in terms of changes. A couple other ones. I think Enron. We'll go back and look at A38, 39. We acknowledge the comments you raised. We haven't had a chance as a task force to discuss it, including your comments on A15 and paragraph 9. Chen-Wei, your comments on the responsibility in line to 220. We have something in paragraph 11 of the standards. So we thought maybe we cover that, but we'll go back and make sure it's all there. And then the A177 access restrictions. The example you gave, I'm in the middle of that, and it's really very difficult situations. In fact, I'm talking to a network next week in terms of how do we deal with that. So in terms of this point in time, we don't know what the result is going to be. So we're not sure how to overcome that at the moment because the restrictions. So we noted your comments and see what we can do. And Julie, your last sentence in A39. Yeah, we'll go back and take a look. I think personally, I'm just reacting. You may never overcome the restriction, but you still be able to get all the evidence. So maybe the wording, we just make sure we clarify that. I think I covered all the comments raised so far. So turn back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Len. Just grab your mic for a sec.
Sorry.
Okay, I think any other comments on this section, responses? I see no other hands. So, you may have anticipated me. The floor is yours again.
So, we'll continue. Next section is paragraph A44 to A84. So, before we open up for comments, so just go through some of the changes in this area. A64, again, this is a task force try to align with the wording in ISO 220 revised. So paragraph 26 in 220 and also how that align with the A64. So in terms of this direct reference to ISO 620, the expert has been deleted, given that having referencing to ISO 220 revised and ISO 620 in the same paragraph was deemed to be confusing. Paragraph A66, A67. This is a suggestion from IAASB. As I said, they have a project going on. So the task force made changes into this paragraph in A66, was adding that communication to those charged with governance may be needed in circumstances where breaches of independence requirements have been identified. Paragraph A70, task force revised the wording to be clearly indicate that a group engagement partner may assign the design or performance of a procedure, task, or action to other members of the engagement team to assist the engagement partner to fulfill the responsibility in accordance with paragraph 28 in the requirement. Paragraph A73, task force added the first bullet and revised the wording of the second bullet in response to a concern that the reference to communicate could be misinterpreted as implying that communication with component auditors only includes meetings or calls. And then next paragraph, paragraph A74, we added wording from paragraph 31 of ISA 220 as these summarized wording was found to be insufficiently clear. Then finally in A84, we revised wording to clarify group auditors' communications, if required, is to auditor and not the component. This change was discussed and agreed with the IAASB task force. So with that, paragraph A44 to A84, Tom, turn back to you for board's input.
Okay, 844 to 884. Wendy?
Thanks, Tom. I only have one comment in this section. It's on A74. And I like the linkage and putting in the ISA 220 material. The concern I have is whether the footnote reference alone to A92 and 93 is adequate, or the reference should be in the application material, particularly in the second bullet. So the comments that I sent through show an edit to the second bullet to say, paragraph 92 of ISA 220 provides examples of areas of significant judgments made by the engagement team. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, Sue?
So my comment was in relation to A53. There's an example at the end, which I feel is really talking about the firm having taken on an engagement that they shouldn't have taken on in the first place. So it's not in line with ISQM1. So my preference would be to delete, or if we don't delete, to make the link a bit more overtly to the ISQM1 procedures.
Thank you, Sue. Chun-Wei?
So 3 comments on this part. So the first one is A59. So A59 all the way to A63, I think we've provided very robust guidance to the group auditors on how they can determine whether the component auditors have the appropriate competence and capabilities. But just reading A59, which is the first paragraph that starts off this whole chain, you have an example in the second part, and it talks about, as part of the confirmation, you may ask the component auditor to confirm that they have the appropriate competence and capabilities and sufficient time. And what I think is okay to have this example, the I guess geography of where it is may give, I guess, the user the impression that a confirmation is sufficient, where this confirmation is really on top of every other thing that they need to do. So I'm just wondering whether one way to sort of de-emphasize this particular example is to maybe shift it to the bottom and say, and frame it as in addition to whatever you're doing, you may want to get a confirmation. So it's more a behavioral thing. Next one is A67, and it is I guess I was just reading the last sentence, and without the original wording, which is overcome the breach and continue to use by being involved, the last bit, by being involved in their work or by supplementing their work, now look a little bit hanging in this particular sentence. Maybe it's just me, but I thought, this sentence will be okay even without that part. So can the task force maybe just have a look? I think the bottom line is the group auditor cannot use the work of the component auditor. So maybe you can just put a full stop there. Last comment that I have in this part is A68. It's a very minor comment. It's again in the middle where we say these are less than serious concern. And then the first example is, for example, lack of industry-specific knowledge. I guess lack is like zero industry knowledge. I wonder if that is a less than serious. I think that's quite a grave concern. So maybe just replacing lack with insufficient. That's all the comments I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie?
Thanks. And my comment is 1, and it's A74. And I wondered if we could just make a small addition to that paragraph, Len, where it could refer to paragraph 45, because a number of the items listed there are things you're going to likely see through your communications and your deliverables already, things like significant matters and significant judgments. And we talk about some of those things in paragraph 45. It may or may not be the case, but I think the linkage would work because as it stands right now, it looks a little bit like an incremental requirement, which it isn't. It's just what you need to do as the partner. So that was just a suggestion.
Thank you. Diane?
Thanks, Tom. I have 2 comments. One is on A64, which deals with the auditor's expert. We say the group auditor may obtain information. It's a little dangling, inconclusive as to always, every situation, what type of information. So a couple suggestions could be you always inquire about the competency and capabilities of the expert, or you only get information when that expert is involved in a matter that could have a material impact on the group. I think giving some qualifiers as to what leads you down the May path would be helpful. And then my second comment, I'm laughing because it deals with the infamous flow chart. In addition to communications, where I was stumbling was the A74 sections 3 and 4, when we start getting into what work papers does the group auditor need to look at. And so I do think there's some guidance, and I will go back to the flow chart to see if we've kind of addressed this, but I think next to communications, this is obviously the real important part as to what that group auditor is expected to look at and whether they need to look at it, or again, they're allowing the component partner to take responsibility for the component work papers. And there's going to be times when the group auditor is quite content to let the component partner do it, and there will be other times where they will want to do it themselves. And I think understanding that and when you have to go further, I think that's where we need a little additional direction would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Anyone on the Zoom call like to come in? I don't see any hands up. So Len, back to you. I think it didn't seem like anything was fatal here, but you got a number of areas where you got some suggestions and feedback.
Yeah, most of comments should come through your written comments. So thank you. As I said, we'll go through your comments with the task force. The one area on A53, that's a reference to ISQ Online. This is a application material paragraph that we will try to address Enron's comments, and in terms of commercial interest, and we try to link to ISQ Online, and we had this language in there for a while. I know Sue erased it, but we spent all the time and got everyone happy with the language. Just wondering, anybody else have any similar comments?
Len, if I remember that this is a paragraph some of our regulatory partners felt very strongly about as well. So this would be on the ones of where beware the unintended consequences of fiddling with it. Anyone?
Okay, if there are no other comments, I will continue. So the next ones, next blocks will be A85 to A105, and there's not a lot of changes in this section. So probably just highlight a couple of them. A94, the task force deleted the last sentence. It was creating confusion, given that it was not fully in line with ISA 315 that was recently revised, and given a location within the proposed standards. So we delete that last sentence. Paragraph A104, the task force clarified the wording, including a more direct reference to paragraph 142, which includes examples of other matters that may need to be communicated timely during the course of the group audit. So those are the two changes I want to highlight for boards. And Tom, turn back to you for comments.
A85 to A105. In the Zoom room. Okay, I don't see any hands up or 10, so I'm assuming that the board is supportive of what's in the language. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your support. So next block will be A106 to A121. There's only one change I want to highlight is paragraph A108. Task force made a few changes to the paragraph to further align with paragraphs with ISA 315 recently revised, particularly paragraph 31 of the ISA 315. So changes to make sure we're consistent. The task force also streamlined the paragraph by repeating some of the repetition in the requirement. So that's the only one I want to highlight, and be happy to take comments.
Okay. Wendy?
Thank you. A119, and I think it relates to the use of the word equal to or lower than. And I feel like we're not consistent throughout the standard in different places when we're talking about materiality. We use lower than, here we use equal, and in another place we use should not exceed. I think I made that comment earlier. So my recommendation here is to just strike equal and have it say lower than, and that's what we sent through.
Sachika?
Thank you, Tom. My comment is paragraph A111. The third bullet talks about whether there are particular components which are more susceptible to risk of material misstatement due to fraud. And my comment is not suggesting some changes in this group audit project, but suggesting future consideration in ongoing fraud project, because I think fraud in group audit is also very, very important issue from the standpoint of public interest. And I heard some view that it may be unclear what the auditors should be looking for to identify particular component which is more susceptible to risks of material misstatement due to fraud. And there are cases when the fraud at the component has a huge impact on the group financial statement. That is critical for group auditor to be aware, understand when the component is more susceptible to risk of material misstatement due to fraud. So I think perhaps we can consider expanding this bullet to include maybe some specific examples or example factors to be considered related to fraud at the component. And considering there is an ongoing 240 fraud project, I think we can discuss this matter in the fraud project rather than in this project, and maybe, sentence could be a little bit enhanced in the future. That's my only comment. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Sashka. Imran?
Thank you. Len, I have 2 comments on A108. A108's been comprehensively rewritten, and I've reflected on the explanations in 2A, but let me leave these 2 comments with you. Is it the intention of the task force here to have really removed all references to component and component auditor in this determination of inherent risk? And is that consistent with the structure of the standard, particularly the requirement in this area? That's my first comment. And secondly, I was left with the impression that this was now a little bit unclear to me what point we were making, because it sounded circular. It seemed imprecise that we were assessing inherent risk by considering IRFs and the likelihood and magnitude of misstatements and all of that. In other words, we are trying to summarize the whole of 315 into these 3 bullets. And I'm not sure that it was altogether clear to me how this will be done in practice and what the working paper will look like. But leaving it there, if you haven't heard objections or complaints from practitioners about it, I imagine they must have a better understanding of this issue than I do. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands up. Len, so maybe you could respond to a couple of the comments we've heard.
Yeah, thank you. Sashiko, that fraud comments you made actually came through from the CAG discussion last week, where they talk about the fraud project proposals. I actually took notes. I think the Japanese CAG member actually expressed exactly the same thing you just explained. So this is something that I know Lynn is listening, and I was also taking notes. So we'll take that on board in terms of we proceed with a fraud project. But that was raised at the CAG meeting last week. Enron, I think I need to go back and look at it. But one of the reasons we changed A108 because there were quite a number of comments in terms of try to align with what's in 315. But we have received your comments, and we just go back and see, in terms of the comments raised by other board member, in terms of consistency, in terms of the language there, to make sure we didn't miss anything. But thank you very much for that comment.
Okay, anyone else on this section? Okay, Len.
Okay, next block will be, I believe it's A122 to A141. It's a lot of paragraphs, sorry. So this area, maybe highlight a few changes we made. A122, the requirement use the term shall take responsibility construct. Several changes were made to clarify that component auditors may also perform tests of control to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Paragraph A126, the task force revised the wording to clarify that the challenges for the group auditor arise in circumstances in which the significant classes for transaction account balances or disclosure in the group financial statements are disaggregated over a large number of components. Then lastly, A140, the task force clarified that when a component auditor involves an auditor's expert, the group auditors does not have to perform the evaluation of the adequacy of the audit expert's work. In such a situation, the group auditor may discuss with the component auditor the nature, scope, and objectives of the auditor's express work, or the component auditor's evaluation of the adequacy of the work of the auditor expert for the purpose of the group audit. So those are the 3 changes I could highlight, and turn back to you, Tom, for comments.
Okay. Comments on 122 to 141? Isabel.
Yes, thank you. My comment is on A127. There has been only one change in this paragraph, which is the addition of the word also. And I don't think I have seen why this word was added. So I'm trying to understand why we needed to add this word also. Does it mean that that on their own substantive analytical procedures cannot be sufficient to perform further audit procedures? And you have to do that in addition to some other procedures. So is it why we wanted to have this also word? And then the next question that arrived discussing with practitioners, some questions whether, as we used further audit procedure expression, and we specifically refer to substantive analytical procedures, does it mean that performing a review as defined by international standards on review engagement would not be sufficient to perform further audit procedures? So is it prohibited to perform only a review, or is it a matter of professional judgment? And if so, of course, we should not mention anything. But if it's prohibited, maybe we should clarify that. Thank you.
Okay. Wendy.
Thank you, Tom. My comments are on 129. And so I was trying to get through 129, 130, and 129 to 133 as a suite, but I came up with revisions to A129 to clarify that further audit procedures at components should be planned and performed in response to assess risk of material misstatement and are not performed on all of the financial information of the component. So we have a suggested revision that has adding in a different lead in. There was one that was deleted to to say in response to assessed risks of material misstatement, the group auditor may. And then in the design paragraph, bullet, design and perform further audit procedures, striking the entire and changing it to all or a significant portion of the financial information of the component. And that was it. Thanks. And I did send those through. I also have something on 132. Which would add to the end of that paragraph. In such scenarios, the component auditor may be responsible for performing the additional procedures, just to clarify who is responsible for those procedures.
Thank you, Wendy. So.
Thanks. I'm in the same area as where Wendy just finished. So around A132 and 133. I think A129 introduces the three options as to what the auditor may choose to do. And I think there's a number of practical implications. And Len, you referenced that we spoke last week, and I was remiss in thanking you for taking the time to do that. It was very very helpful. And I think we talked here about this. This is an area where there are real practical implications. It's probably a good opportunity for for more detailed non-authoritative guidance. But I also think because there are changes there, it will be helpful to be able to distinguish a little bit more clearly what the difference is between those two bullets. And I think there's one or two things in the language where when we talk about performing specific audit procedures, we reference the financial information, which sounds like the full financial information, whereas I think what we're talking about is potentially just a particular element of the financial statements or something when we get down into that more granular level. So we've sent a couple of suggestions, but I think it's just about being clear about what the difference is in the potentially the work effort and also potentially who might be doing this, because when you get into that final bucket, that's probably the area where as a group auditor, you are just instructing a component auditor to do one or two specific procedures. So as I say, maybe some suggestions as to how we can distinguish what those different buckets mean. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Imran.
Thank you. You know, Lynn, when you just showed us the picture of Manhattan, you described how easy it was to get around Manhattan because all the streets are numbered sequentially. But you know, when you get below Houston Street and there are no street numbers, you can go around in circles and not know where you are, you know. and so I felt a little bit like that on one of the paragraphs here, which is the one in paragraph A135. You've made some changes to this paragraph, Lynn, which left me a little bit unclear or confused. Maybe let me emphasize the 2 points. One is that we have a paragraph in which there's a discussion of substantive procedures in the same paragraph as tests of controls. And then secondly, there's a may in the first paragraph, in the first part of the first sentence in the same paragraph as a reference to a requirement in ISO 330. And I just put all of that there because it's probably would fall within the ambit of things that our CASP group may not like, but I hope that you can offer some clarification so that that paragraph can be made a little bit clearer as to what we're driving at. I feel we need to leave out one of the concepts to make it a little bit simpler. Is there 4 different concepts sitting in one paragraph? Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. So Len, you have a question to respond to or questions to respond to from Isabel, and a number of suggestions about drafting on a couple of the paragraphs here.
Yeah, thank you. On Isabel's question about review, I thought at least maybe my task force member and my staff can help me, is I thought we settled this quite a long time ago that review is not considered audit procedures. We had that debate, you know, at least a year ago. So that would be my answer and response. But my task force member and staff can come in because that was exactly what we had decided on. So I just want to make sure I missed the boat. Right. So nothing to add. Okay. So at least board agreed. So we have that clarification. There are some editorial comments. We'll definitely take them on board or consider them. You have to trust task force discretion in looking at them. But the comments on A129 and A133. I see we have not made changes in those 2 paragraphs, other than, of course, the leading in A129. But these are the language we have also been settled for a while. And from the written comments that Wendy and Sue raised, is exactly the same type of comments, same comments. So, and I was wondering whether this is something that it is more for application material outside the standards, because we have spent our time on this, including in the ED, and you know, getting a lot of support, and nothing really came up. now that before the standard is going to be approved, we had this comment raised. So clearly there might be some practical consideration that we need maybe better addressed outside the standard. So just want to say that, because, but also happy for my task force member and staff to come in, because these two paragraphs have been there for a while, and my task force member feel to come in if they need.
Len, yes, absolutely. They've been there for a while, and to get to the point that we got to with these paragraphs, there were many hours and hours of debate, both at task force level and at board level, to get to where we got to now. And I just feel that this is perhaps in that area of tinkering and then unraveling what we've worked so hard to get to a position on. So I do, however, agree that this is one where I think some practical guidance could really help, and that could be part of our implementation material. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone really feel strongly about this? This does not, it didn't seem like this rose to a fatal flaw issue. And as I said, the start, we talked about some of the discipline we're going to have to apply. And because this hadn't been raised much recently, I'm inclined to give the task force some discretion in this area. Okay, no one's raising their hand. Anything else, Len, you'd like to?
Just everyone's comments on A135. We'll talk to the CAS board member, in task force member from the CAS group, and see we can make it clear in terms of the language using when A135. Thank you. So Tom, if there are no other comments in the section, we'll continue.
Please do.
And give me a second. My papers are everywhere, so just give me 1 second to get my papers in order. I think the next section is A142 to 179. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So to highlight just a few changes in this section, the task force deleted paragraph A112X from the September turnaround draft. Board member says it's so repetitive, so it's really no point having that paragraph, so we deleted that. Paragraph A145, the task force moved the first sentence of the paragraph A113 of the September turnaround draft here as paragraph A72 provides the overarching guidance for the group auditor that is useful in making determination in accordance with paragraph 47 that we talked about earlier. Also explaining agenda item paper 2A, the task force also revised the leading wording to the bullets as it was found to be repetitive of the requirement. So the revised wording now linked to group auditors' considerations in accordance with paragraph 47C, which we talked about earlier in the requirement section. Paragraph 150, the task force revised the wording to refer the group auditor more broadly considering the engagement team's exercise of professional skepticism when evaluating the sufficiency and the appropriateness of the audit evidence. So we will clarify the wording in the first bullet. Then lastly, A159, as explained in the agenda item 2A, the task force concluded that a reminder about the group auditor's possible no-client communication obligation would be helpful. So this wording was discussed with the IAASB task force, and they are happy with the wording here. So with that, Tom, happy to take comments.
So this is taking us through the end of the 8 paragraphs right now, from 142 to A179. Any hands to be raised? Sue?
Yeah, a couple of points. A144. I appreciate it's not a change, but it is something that we've raised previously around the description of the overall conclusion. And we say here we reference an overall conclusion statement. I'm not sure whether we need statement. It starts to sound a bit like report, which is quite sensitive, and we've had concerns there. So I wonder whether that word could be deleted. A153, I just wondered about the consistency with the requirement paragraph, which I think is 52 now, because 52 is talking about the evaluation of uncorrected misstatements, whereas A153 is talking about both corrected and uncorrected. So I wonder whether we want to look at that. And then finally on A173, there was a sentence at the beginning of that paragraph, which was talking about not needing to replicate the component auditor's documentation on the group auditor's file. I appreciate that's been taken out because it sort of changed the dynamic of the paragraph. But I did feel it's a useful sentence in the context of the guidance on what needs to be on the group audit file. So while I'm not suggesting that we keep it where it was previously, it would be useful perhaps if that could be maybe a closeout to the paragraph or something that actually then reflects the fact that having made all the considerations about what you need on the group audit file, what this isn't saying is you have to replicate everything. So those were the 3 points. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Imran?
Thank you. Then I've got 3 or 4 comments to make in this section. I've given you some element of this already in what I've submitted, but let me try to explain my points here. The first leads to A146. A146, where we've made extensive changes on the lead-in. I'm referring to the third bullet in A146, which uses the words component auditor firm, not component auditor. So my TA checked this up for me and reminds me that this term is used just one time in this entire standard. All other references to component auditor are the component auditor alone. This time we referred to the firm. And as we know, component auditor firm is not a defined term. And I was wondering whether, well, a couple of things arise here. Either we define this in order to make it clear how's this different to all the other references to component auditor, and I doubt that we'll be interested in offering a definition at this point. But if it is used correctly, if this is indeed supposed to refer to the firm, it raised the question for us whether every other reference to component auditor in the standard is indeed the component auditor and not the component auditor firm. So I offer that just as a check. We have not done the exercise, but this component auditor firm really now stands out once it gets pointed out to you. And then you wonder whether all of the other 100-odd references to component auditor, there shouldn't be more references to component auditor firm in there. Of course, the other way to fix this would be just to make this component auditor. And then we run with our common understanding of it. The second point in this batch of paragraphs then is on A166. My TA, Ian, who's the expert in this area, reminds me, and he's asked this question, and it's about assembly and retention of documentation. He asks, we're specifically directing that this is we should be following the policies and procedures of the group auditor's firm. And he asked the question, what if it is a joint audit? What will the solution be? We don't know the answer. We don't know what the thinking would be. We have a whole set of guidance in South Africa around what that could be, but we're offering that as a comment at this point. The next one is A173. I think Sue's just also spoken about A173 now, where she referred to the first sentence that was deleted. We got 2 comments on A173, but both comments were pointing to the same issue. It feels as if this matter is unsettled, and that we really need to try to resolve this. It's unclear now to me, Len, whether replication is actually necessary or not. Because that whole first sentence which talked is being deleted, and now replication is thrown in together with summarizing and retaining copies. I foresee that this lack of clarity could lead to some disagreements. And I don't know whether what Sue offered was some hint as to how it could be solved. Another comment here, though, is this list of examples of such component audit documentation may include. So that we're still in 173. Whether within here or somewhere in some of the guidance that goes out with the standard, we include a practical example of the group auditor needing to retain copies of certain component audit documentation to facilitate review by the engagement partner or the engagement quality reviewer. Moving on to my last comment, which is on paragraph A175, and it's the last sentence of A175, and it's just a request for clarification there, please, that the audit tool may also be used for audit documentation, including providing information about the review and date. What review is this referring to? Is this in relation to the review performed by the component auditor or someone else? So, can I ask that the task force maybe add 2 or 3 words there to make it clearer as to which review this is referring to? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Imran. Roger?
Thanks, Dom. My comments on A173 as well, and the deletion of the first sentence. I'm with Imran and Sue that I think it's much less clear now as to whether or not what we're doing on replication of group auditors, of component auditor documentation. I thought it was clearer before, and we'd drawn the line in the sand, and the rationale as I saw it was there was many other safeguards within the standard to make sure we've got appropriate documentation. I do believe that that deletion has made it less clear. So I would be happy for the task force to have a look and see whether or not that was the intention or not. Thank you.
Diane?
Thanks, Tom. I just have one comment. It's on A145. When you look at it in its cleaned form after you accept all the revisions, it's a lot of referencing to other paragraphs, and I'm just not sure it actually conveys what we really need to do. So I'm not even sure you need it any longer. So just if the task force could just look at 145, when it's accepted version, and whether it's still conveying why we need to do something and what we need to do, then I think it's worth keeping. I'm just a little unsure at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Okay. One of the things we could address in this line, that's everyone hands who's up, is that paragraph A173. But there are a couple other comments that you want to address too.
Yeah, we have seen a number of comments on A173. Some member may not raise them, I guess, because they're being raised. So the task force already started looking at it. We'll come back with suggestions in terms of how to address the comments you raised. But that's definitely on the radar of issues we're going to be addressing when we turn around a document. Just a couple of comments. Enron, thank you for noting a joint audit, but we made a decision before the ED actually that we're doing joint audit, but we'll take note, for the work plan is some reference in joint audit. So maybe your comments will pass on to the staff in terms of when the board decide to look at a joint audit. I think there was one comment maybe I want to address was A153. I'll just make sure I have the right page. I think Sue, you raised a comment. I think either corrected or uncorrected misstatement could indicate a systematic issues, but only the uncorrected misstatements are evaluated in considering the effect on the other opinion. So just want to respond to your comments on that. I think the majority of the comments here is related to A173, and that's the one we will come back to the board in a turnaround document. Thank you.
Okay, any further comments on this section? Okay, Len, we've done with the 8 paragraphs, but there are appendices to this standard.
Sorry, next slide, please. So this there are not a lot of changes in appendices. So just turn over to the board for input. You know, there's kind of explained by itself by the changes we made in the agenda paper 2B, and happy to take comments on the appendices.
Any comments on the appendices? Scanning the room, Zoom. Okay, no comments on the appendices, so that's positive.
So we're going to the conforming and consequential amendments. Let me just get my paper in order again, moving back and forth. Let me get a result here.
This is, if you're using the marked version, which I meant, rest of the board is, that's agenda item 2D.
Yeah, okay, so I'll go through, I guess I'll just go through all of them in one go. There are actually not too many of them. So the conforming and consequential amendments arising from proposed ISO 600 revised basically update, reflect changes as a result of the changes that is going to be done in, for example, other standards, some of the foundational standards that's, and also QM standards that's being linked to 600. The conforming and consequential amendments now also include changes to the introduction to the illustrated reports. So those had reference to ISO 600. So some of the specific ones, maybe I just highlight them. One is ISO 260 revised, paragraph A4. Proposed 600 revised now makes it clear that the group auditors communicate with those charged with governance of the group, and not at the component level. Therefore, the task force clarified that component auditors may also communicate matters to those in charge with governance of the component and link to the existing guidance to that point. ISO 300 appendix, the task force deleted the last bullet under the header, significant factors, preliminary engagement activities and knowledge gained in other engagement. There's a difference between the last 2 sub-bullets was deemed to be confusing. So the task force aligned the wording to ISO 315, the revised ISO 315 issued in 2019. And also in ISO 315 revised, paragraph 8218, proposed 600 does not require more involvement by the group engagement partner if the significant risk related to component, and for the group engagement team to direct the work required at the component by the component auditor. So proposed 600, paragraph 43 does require the group auditor to evaluate the appropriateness of the design and performance of further audit procedure for significant risk on which a component auditor is determined the further audit procedure to be performed. Therefore, the task force revised the wording accordingly in A28 application material in ISO 315. Then lastly, ISRE 2400 paragraph A80, the task force reinstated this paragraph as practitioners may still be engaged to review financial statements of the group. So those are the major conforming and consequential amendments I want to highlight for the board, and happy to take comments on those.
Okay. Any comments on the conforming and consequential amendments? This is agenda item 2D, as I mentioned. Imran.
Thank you. Mine is just a question, please, Lynn. In 2A, you explain the change that we've made in ISO 320 on materiality in planning, performing an audit. And we say in it that in paragraph 13, we've noted that the concept of appropriately low levels was missing. Hence, the task force reinstated this wording. Len, do you mind explaining what's the implication of this change? Is it merely a correction, or does this have some impact? That's my only point of clarification that I am asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. I see Sue coming in now.
Yeah, thanks. Len, we've sent a couple of small comments through, but I think the one that I've been sort of rereading a couple of times is around the 300 and the application material A8, which I wonder whether that should relate to 10A in any event, but it would be helpful in that area, perhaps in the context of group audit engagements, to reflect on the extent of the potential review of work performed by component auditors, particularly where it's a statutory audit engagement, for example, where the component auditor is planning the review. It's maybe a place where we could reflect on the fact that there isn't necessarily a need to kind of review everything. So just something around the structure of the group auditor review. Thanks.
Thank you. Len, would you like to respond?
With so in reverse, I guess, Suya, I just want to make sure I understand. You are suggesting we revise 300 to address the situation you just talked about?
So I think if we linked A8 to 10A, that would potentially help, but also maybe a reference in A8 around the planned extent of review of the component auditor work. I know we've sent some suggestions through, Len.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a look and by the task force and based on the suggestions you made. The other one was everyone's comments on the ISO 320. Maybe I think my staff to help me, but I thought we made that change was a corrections the wording, but probably need staff to confirm that. I thought it was a correction we made.
Yeah, Len, it was and Imran, it was simply to make the wording in paragraph 813 of 320 consistent with now the definition in paragraph 9A. That you needed the reference to reducing it to an appropriately low level. Now, all that's been done really is take those words that are in 320 and substitute aggregation risk, which has now been defined. So there really is no implication other than making the wording consistent with what was done in the definition.
Any reaction? Julie?
No reaction to that, but I did have comment if I may.
Does anyone want to come back into what Dan just said? Okay, I don't see any. Julie?
My comment, Len, was, and it pops up a couple of times, but the first time I flagged it is at the bottom of page 5 of 34. So it's A53 of 220. And it looks like we've replaced component with entities and business units. And I just wondered if we've used the entire, that's not exactly the definition of component in 600 revised. So I wondered if we should be true to the definition of component wherever we've replaced component in this to the new way of describing it, which is entities, business unit, function, or business activity.
Okay, so. Sorry, okay. That's everyone. It was a stray name tent. We're out of practice, of course. Len.
No, Julie will take a look at A53 to 220 and by the task force. But I noted three comments in the conforming consensual amendments, and we saw some written comments coming through. So we'll deal with that as a part of the task force process of looking at all the comments. So thank you for those.
Okay, Len. I think that's everything on agenda item 2D.
Huh? That was the last one. Oh, good. Too many, a lot of paper in front of me.
We can invent a new agenda paper if you want.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a lot of work for the task force to digest. And thank you for all those comments. Thank you for the support. And most of my task force are here in New York, so we'll be spending our time going through the hundreds of comments that's offline, and we'll collectively as a task force will figure out what to bring back later in the week. But this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Len. So while there were a number of comments, I don't feel overwhelmed relative to where we are normally on some of these approval sessions during a plenary board week. So that's great. I did think it would be appropriate right now. We heard from Jim Dowkin earlier, but Janine, you've been patiently listening to our deliberations, and I don't know if you want to share some of the PIOB perspective on the discussion you heard today.
Thanks, Tom, and well, good afternoon or good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to listen to all the deliberations on this almost final draft version of ISO 600. And yeah, to share some perspectives, PIOB perspectives. Let me say that I was glad to hear that there's a high level of support for this draft, also by the organizations you did outreach to, so the international organizations you mentioned. And also that the CAG is supportive or had no comments to share about this draft version. And let me say that I was also I was also glad to hear that the comment on whether additional working papers would be reviewed in practice as per paragraph 47, so the requirement 47, that was given specific attention. And I was happy to hear that. And as adequate supervision and review and documentation in the group auditor's file are public interest issues as published by the PIOB, as you know. And while I listened to the deliberations, I also noted that in application material A74, that there is reference made to ISA 220 revised paragraph 31, which lists the things that the engagement partner should review, all the documentation that should be reviewed. Significant matters or significant judgments are mentioned there. And in relation to requirement 47, this is an important important guidance, I think. And I also noted that in the guidance application material A72, it says as an example that if a significant risk is included, a more detailed review of a component audit documentation may be appropriate. It does not say that detailed review would be expected or something like that, which is a sort of different message than in ISA 220, which is referenced in application material A74. So therefore, I actually would welcome from a public interest perspective to consider whether ISA 220 paragraph 31, which is only listed explicitly in the application material, for clarity purposes could be somehow more explicitly referenced or referred to in the requirements of this standard. And as application material may not get the same attention in audit firms when updating their audit methodology based on this revised standard, it is preferable to be as clear as possible, I think, on the minimum requirements for review of component audit working papers by the group auditor in the requirements opposed to in the application material. This was expressed previously by other PIB observers, how important requirements are compared to application material. Also in view of less enforceability when something is guidance and not a requirement. So I just wanted to flag this from the perspective of the public interest issues that PIOB published, and to give that as into consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Janine. I'm sure the task force will consider that. Again, these paragraphs have been considered in detail over the last, I guess now I didn't realize, Len, that it was 6 years old. It's already into primary school, this standard, but we just have to be careful though that we don't change the intent of the standard. So as with all else, the task force will consider it. Okay, any other comments that people want to raise before we close the public element of today's session? Okay, could I thank everyone for joining today. I think that those who are on the Zoom session could break. I just want, from a logistics standpoint for people here, I'd like you just to stay in the room because I have a couple of requests to make to people. Michelle or Armand, we could close the public broadcast right now.